handcuffed or forced to wear a prison uniform, and his mugshot will not be released to the public. You can see the motorcade moving there closer to the federal courthouse in Miami. Fox News correspondent Madeline Rivera is live outside the courthouse in Miami. Maddie, what's the mood there?
Mike, you've obviously got several media organizations here covering this story, but you've also got people who have gathered here for hours in the Miami heat to protest or support the former president. You can see right over here, they're selling clothing, they're selling hats, they're carrying flags, they've got their signs and they're chanting. People here have come from across the country. We spoke to one supporter who was from California, another one from Dallas. They are fired up. You've got a range of emotions here. One Trump supporter says the charges against the former president are divisive, while you've got another critic who says that the former president is a con man. Though people are fired up, Mike, we also are seeing that for the most part, these demonstrations are largely peaceful. In fact, one Trump supporter says they don't even want to call this as a protest. They want to call it a support for the former president. You're also seeing ramped up security measures over here, police officers on bikes. The city's mayor says they've been working with federal, state, and local partners on security measures, but they are confident that they can handle any large demonstrations. They say they've had experiences with this in the past, most notably with the George Floyd protests, Mike. So again, peaceful for now, ramped up security measures, and people here, on both sides, just wanting to have their voices heard, Mike.
Madeline, last I checked, it was 90 degrees in Miami right now, and so obviously a hot day, but so far tempers are not flaring, correct?
No, right now, as we have seen some verbal arguments, but for the most part, again, things have been largely peaceful. But yes, it is hot out here. It is also rainy season in Miami, so it's been raining pretty frequently throughout the past several days. So that's one of the things that could affect how large this turnout will be later on today, Mike.
All right, Madeline Rivera live outside the courthouse in Miami as we look live at the former presidential motorcade heading from the President's Golf Club in Doral to the federal courthouse in Miami. This initial court appearance will be presided over by U.S. Magistrate Judge Jonathan Goodman. From there, U.S. District Judge Eileen Cannon will take over. She's a Trump appointee who originally appointed a special master to review the documents seized in the FBI raid. Since this is not an official arraignment, it is not clear if Mr. Trump will be asked to enter a plea. We would assume it would be not guilty. But the judge will likely set bail and pretrial conditions and schedule the next court hearing. After that, it is mostly legal housekeeping, including setting deadlines to file motions and getting security clearances for the Trump legal team so they can examine the classified documents. It is not clear what impact this will have on the 2024 Republican primary process. President Biden has repeatedly refused to comment, but the former president and current GOP frontrunner is not staying silent at all. He is claiming the charges are part of a broader partisan effort to keep him from another term in the Oval Office. And he says it won't work, the plot will backfire, and his polling will only improve. Mr. Trump is also lashing out at Jack Smith, the special counsel who brought the charges, accusing him of electoral interference and calling him a, quote, deranged psycho and Trump hater, despite the fact that Smith was appointed to his position as a United States attorney by the former president himself. And as you can see, the motorcade continuing making its way through the highways there in Miami, heading for the federal courthouse in downtown Miami on a lovely day, 90-degree day in South Florida. And we will see if there are any signs of storms ahead or any signs of trouble outside the federal courthouse. With that, let's go to Fox News Channel's coverage already in progress.
We don't need neighborhood, we don't need family anymore. All these crazy ideas. And now reality's catching up, and it's hurting us badly. And today is, frankly, just a symptom of a much bigger problem, which we talk about here, and that is we no longer live in that world. We need to understand America's being challenged in a way it hasn't been challenged in 30 or 40 years, and we either respond or we are going to live in a world in which the most powerful and stable country in the world is going to be China, a communist dictatorship, not the United States.
Senator Rubio, I'm sure you saw Vivek Ramaswamy, the GOP presidential candidate, just a short time ago, and in the days leading up to this, after the indictment was issued, he is pledging to pardon the former president if he is elected. And he's now challenging his 2024 rivals to do the same. Do you support that? Do you think that's a good idea?
To proactively announce that?
Sure, to put the other rivals on the spot.
I haven't even thought about it. I will say this to you, okay? And I'm not running for president, so, but I will say this to you. That's exactly the kinds of things that you're going to hear. That's what happens in polarized, volatile politics. People are going to go to their corner, they're going to rally around their tribe, and it's going to further divide the country, and it isn't worth it. The allegations made here, I'm not saying these documents should have been there, just like they shouldn't have been in Biden's garage either. But they do not meet the standard of bringing a prosecution whose damage, the indictment, the damage is doing to our country already, the damage it's already inflicted is far beyond damage, if any, of the president storing this in cardboard boxes somewhere.
So would you urge other GOP candidates to vow the same, that they would pardon?
Would I do what now?
Would you urge other GOP candidates to vow the same, to
I
make that pledge?
Listen, it's not that I'm against it or for it. I haven't given any thought to the implications of announcing something like that and what it would mean. Suffice it to say that I think that, I'm just guessing here, if you took a poll among Republican GOP voters, that position that he's taken about the proactive pardoning is going to be very popular. And that, you know, whether even if let's say Republicans are not a majority in this country, it's at least 40-something% of the country. That's a lot of people. In some parts of the country, it's a supermajority depending on the state. Again, these are the kinds of divisive, damaging things that an indictment reflects over what? For what? What was the damage? Was this stolen and sold to the Iranians, sold to the Saudis, you know, given over to the Russians? That allegation's not made in that indictment. No one's made that allegation. So at the end of the day, you have to weigh the damage of the indictment versus the damage of the allegations if proven true. And it's just not even a fair way.
So how do you make that calculation? Because if you look at the indictment, and it's the DOJ side of the story. Right. The former president hasn't had a chance to weigh in just yet. But according to this indictment, the former president goes to great lengths to obstruct the retrieval of these documents by the FBI and the National Archives. So how do you make that calculation as to what amounts to worthy of a prosecution? Former Vice President Pence had documents. He didn't know he had them. He immediately turned them over. President Biden had documents, some of which go back to his Senate days, and what he was ever doing with them in the first place is a big question, but he turned them back over. The difference here, according to this indictment, is this former president didn't want to give them back.
Well, first of all, indictments are one-sided documents, right? The indictment doesn't say, but this is the president's defense. I'm sure the president will have an answer. I'm not his lawyer. I'm not on his defense team. I don't pretend to be, so I'm not going to give an answer to what the counter to that is.
But I'm just wondering, when you say that this is not worth dividing the country over, how do you make the calculation as to what is worth?
Well, because I think ultimately, if the indictment, if in fact there was harm caused to the national security, I mean, the charges here are, as you've talked about, the conspiracy to do this, but the other charges about the espionage charges, under the Espionage Act, you've got to make the argument that here's the damage this has caused to the United States, and you have to weigh that against the damage this has caused. Here's the irony in all this, okay? If you are today not the president, just a government employee in the intelligence community, and you take classified information, let's say the stuff that was in Biden's garage, or Trump, Mar-a-Lago, or whatever, they leak it to the media publishes it. Now the whole world knows about it. There's damage. That reporter who leaked that information will go to jail before they disclose who gave them that information. And there are people that have access to classified information that strategically leak for political purposes, intel and half-truths based on intel on a daily basis. And the media protects them. And I'm not justifying that. I'm saying there's a lot more damage done there with sources that are protected by the press than there is by the allegations, if proven, in this indictment. Meanwhile, we are watching in real time the damage this is doing to our country. It's further polarizing us at a time when we have to be united behind some things, like what do we do about the fact that we've given away our jobs, deindustrialized America, have a shortage of medicines, including cancer medicines in our country. China's expanding all over the world. Our military is eroding in its capabilities vis-a-vis China. You name it. I mean, destruction of the family, destruction of community, our borders being overrun. We're not focused on any of this stuff. We're focused on an indictment that, frankly, has no harm and no victim associated with it.
Senator, just a few moments ago, the current president, Joe Biden, was meeting with NATO's Stoltenberg in the Oval Office. They addressed a few things, and the president was ultimately asked about this indictment. We're going to play it out. Just a few seconds. We'll watch it, and we'll get your reaction.
All right. Yep, and thank you President, have you discussed?
Mr. President,
Thank you very much.
have you read the Trump indictment, sir?
Everyone, thank you very much.
Do you agree with Dr. Biden
Thank you very much, everyone.
that she was surprised Republican?
Thank you very much, everyone. We're going to begin exiting this way. Thank you, everyone, very much. Move this way. Everyone, please move this way.
Thank you.
All right, so he looked on and smiled and did not answer questions, but it was shouted to him whether or not he had actually read the indictment. He did not respond to any of those questions, some of them hard to hear. What do you make of the White House's handling of this current situation as the former president makes his way to the
Well,
courthouse?
I mean, they don't want to be associated with it, right? They want to pretend this is all clean and fair and that this is not political in any way and that they're not involved. Donald Trump, as of today, is the likeliest opponent in a campaign against Joe Biden. The notion that the people in the White House aren't following this carefully is ridiculous. The notion that this prosecution team is not made up of people that were told your job is to find evidence to go after Donald Trump is ridiculous. And everyone, I mean, it's just common sense tells you that, no matter how much they pretend. So I don't know if the president's read the indictment or not, but I am most certain that the people in that White House and around him that are running for re-election are aware, fully aware, of what is happening and what is being done to President Trump, because that is their likeliest opponent as of today in a general election that's now only 17 months away. And the notion that they're not following this is ridiculous. So he's going to pretend he doesn't know and he is not paying attention, but clearly the people around him that are interested in his re-election are.
Yeah, he'll be making the turn onto I-95 South and get off at the Northwest 8th Street exit momentarily, and that puts him just...
You know, traffic does not look like that every day. I just want everybody to know
well,
that.
it looks like it does on the other side.
Oh, yeah, they're all standing by.
You know,
I just want to be clear about that.
In terms of some of the things that are happening to the country as an effect of this, is there's bad traffic in Miami.
It's the wrong day to
the
make a
freeway
dental
at this
appointment.
point.
Yeah.
So they're getting off at the Northwest 8th Street exit momentarily, which puts them just seconds away from getting off on Northwest 5th. They'll make a left, and then they'll go in the back door of the courthouse from there. Do you, Senator, see this coming before a jury, and maybe the case in New York as well, before the election?
Well, I don't know. First of all, I think it's going to be tough. He's going to have to work real hard to put together a defense team for the reasons that I posited. And then, obviously, they're going to have access to all that information and have time to develop a defense. So I don't know. I'm not an expert on how the federal courts. I haven't practiced in federal court, but I can tell you that from everyone I've talked to, I think you have to sort of assume that this thing's going to take a while, not to mention that this involves national security secrets. So there's a whole process set up, not just to clear the lawyers, but also to give jurors access to classified information. Yeah. So even the picking of a jury itself could be complex given that factor. So, but again, I'm not an expert on how this will all play out. This is not going to be a 6-month thing. I mean, this is going to drag on right through the election season, irrespective of what happens in the primaries, and further divide the country and take us away from the things we should be focused on, which is what my book is about.
Yeah, congratulations on the book, by the way.
Thank you.
Could I just one quick follow-up to that, Senator? Yep. So do you believe he should still be running in the middle of all this? Should it drag out that long?
Yeah, if you're Donald Trump, and he's made it very clear, he believes he's done nothing wrong. He believes that's his position. That's the position his lawyers are going to outline in court. Why would he drop out of a race? But I also think you have to understand this. This guy's now been repeatedly targeted. I mean, this is not in a vacuum. This is constant. From the day he came down the escalator, but most importantly, from the day he got elected, we spent 3 years and basically millions of dollars chasing after this theory that some organization, Washington Post, won a Pulitzer Prize on a fake story, that the Russians were working hand in hand with the Trump organization to steal an election. I mean, then 2 impeachments, including one after he was out of office. I mean, you reach a point in which you're going to fight back against these things, and dropping out is surrender.
All right. Senator, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Senator. Good to see you. Appreciate it.
Martha McCallum back with us now, executive editor and anchor of The Story. Martha, I should also note that as the motorcade continues to make its way to the courthouse there, the president, after sending out earlier via Truth Social, one of the saddest days in the history of our country, we are a nation in decline, he just again a moment ago seems to be tweeting, or I should say truth socialing from the motorcade. He just sent out, "On my way to courthouse, witch hunt, MAGA." Your thoughts?
Yeah, you now see people at his rallies and events holding signs that say witch hunt that are pre-printed. Clearly, this is part of what has become his campaign now, that he is under fire, that he's under constant attack, as Senator Rubio was just saying. And he laid out, I think, a number of really good reasons why today is obviously a moment as this thing begins. But it is going to be woven in to the part and fabric of the next year and a half of this election cycle, where you're going to see the Georgia case also come to light. You're going to see the January 6th case, which is also being led by Jack Smith, come to light. Listen to the cheers. As the former president goes by, they called, they put out, emails and notifications. Please come support former President Trump as he heads into the courtroom today. So the other thing that I think is worth revisiting from Senator Rubio is, again, the other side of the equation, which will be the Trump defense, that he shared these papers, he showed them to certain individuals. One was a writer, one was a publisher, another part of a fundraising team, but that no harm was done to the United States national security as a result. If there was, or if they have evidence there was, it certainly was not in the indictment that way. And I think you're going to hear that from his side as well, Sandra.
Very interesting. John?
Going into the entrance to the courthouse off of Northwest 5th Street. From there, they'll likely go into a carport, so we probably won't see the former president out of the car, nor will we see him at any time while he is inside the courthouse. Again, the magistrate judge, Jonathan Goodman, received a petition from a number of media organizations to open it up to cameras. He declined, saying that federal court does not allow cameras in the building at all, and that he was not going to make an exception in this case. So all of this will take place behind closed doors. The next time we'll see Donald Trump is when the motorcade exits the building as he heads to the airport to head back to New Jersey. He's planning to have an event at his golf club tonight, Brett Baer, where he will address all of the proceedings of the day, and I'm sure he will have a lot to say about it.
Yeah, different golf club in Bedminster than we saw last time after an indictment, an appearance in court after that Manhattan situation that we covered. He went to Mar-a-Lago and gave a similar speech at a fundraiser. It's probably going to be the same structure as that, and pretty full-throated defense and defiant as he has been. John, I really appreciated the question to Senator Rubio, and the law is the law, and when to bring an indictment and when to charge is a great question. As you see him, the teams exiting the cars there, it seems like he's already gone into the courtroom underneath. But there, from the other side, people look at this and say, if there is evidence that the former president knew that he didn't declassify this, that it was national security information, and he talks about that and then shows it to reporters and others in the room, and it includes other things like in the indictment, plans to attack Iran, there are obviously statutes that deal with all of this. And the question is, to your question to Senator Rubio, when is it right? When, in the big picture, should they move forward with this? And I think, that battle back and forth, and the special counsel saying, read the indictment. That's what he said in his short statement, and nobody's above the law. And that's their point.
And Brett, if I could just follow up on that, and something Andy McCarthy alluded to earlier, talking about the way this is playing out in the court of public opinion and the way that is playing in and having a factor in all of this. You go back to the polling that was just released Monday, finding 81% of Republicans think these charges against the former president were politically motivated. That was a Reuters poll. And the president has since talked about how this is only helping him in the polls. And that is all very interesting leading up to this moment.
I think you're right, and there's all evidence to suggest that that's not going to change. I mean, there were some polls that were taken from beginning right before the indictment and then afterwards, and it didn't move. In fact, it went up a couple of points in the GOP primary race for the former president. You wonder over time whether all of these things will add up and somehow affect the race in some way, because they're not going to come to resolution, as we've been talking about. It's likely a year plus before some of these things even head to trial. So it will be the thing that hangs over this entire GOP primary, and eventually, if he wins the nomination, the general election.
So Jack Smith said, read the indictment. All the information is in there. Well, we read it so folks at home didn't have to. And here are the charges that the president will be answering in court today. This is call for number 8. First of all, 31 counts of willful retention of national defense information, 1 count of conspiracy to obstruct justice, 1 count of withholding a document or record, corruptly concealing a document or record, 1 count, concealing a document in a federal investigation, 1 count, scheme to conceal, 1 count, and making false statements and representations, 1 count. Now, let's go to call for number 9. Worst case scenario here. Willful retention of national defense information. Maximum prison term, 10 years, fine $250,000. Conspiracy to obstruct justice, maximum prison term, 20 years, max fine $250,000. Withholding a document or record, max prison term, 20 years, max fine $250,000. Corruptly concealing a document or record, another 20 years and $250K. Concealing a document in a federal investigation, the same thing. Scheme to conceal, 5 years, or the same fine. False statements and representations, 5 years and $250,000. Martha, if he were to be convicted on all 37 counts, and no one is saying that he ever would be, that's a lot of prison time.
It sure is. In fact, even one of those, as has been pointed out, he's 76 years old, could amount to potentially a life sentence. You know, it raises questions about if we did get that far down the road, if there were to be a conviction in this case, you know, and if he wasn't the president and able to pardon himself, would a Democrat president, even potentially this president, Biden, if he were to win again, would he see clear to pardoning the president? We've seen these situations before with Richard Nixon, with President Clinton. President Clinton basically reached an agreement. He had to pay a fine. He had to accept being disbarred, obviously humiliating on both counts for him. Richard Nixon was pardoned by the Republican president who followed him, Gerald Ford. And the reason was to heal the nation. And that, at that time, was met with some outrage by many people in the country. And it was met in a welcome way by others. But I think one thing is clear. Everyone seems to agree, and we've heard this from Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, in the interview he did with Sean Hannity last night, that this is a sad situation that the country finds itself in. And I think one of the other things politically to watch, because we're all discussing, I think, quite rightly, how long it's going to take for all this to play out. Is there an exhaustion factor, and does that potentially help a third-party candidate, which is something that gets discussed quite a bit? You know, do people decide that the current president is too old? That's the common criticism against him. And we know that 60% of Americans, 70% of Americans say they don't want him to run again. This president has a 60% measure on that number. So you got to ask yourself, is there an exhaustion factor here with the American people? Even if they sympathize with the former president, are they ready to turn the page to a new time where there's less litigiousness and less chaos? That's going to be, I think, one of the things that's discussed quite a bit as we get deeper into this campaign season.
All right, you are looking live outside the federal courthouse there in Miami. You can obviously hear the people gathering there. Some even appear to have some megaphones and chants happening in the background there. This is the day that the former president, as he makes his way to that courthouse, he arrived in Miami earlier ahead of this Tuesday court appearance. These are the criminal charges related to his possession of classified documents, 37 felony counts against the former president. He's been outspoken since those charges were taken against him. He has said that he plans to plead not guilty. And we should know more about what exactly is happening behind closed doors since his motorcade arrived there just a short time ago, John.
Yeah, and again, the president's inside the courthouse. No cameras allowed in, so we're not going to see him again until he leaves. But that's quite a scene outside of that beautiful courthouse in picturesque downtown Miami with pro-Trump supporters and Trump opponents both gathered out there to voice their opinions on what's happening. Of course, the Trump supporters are going to say that this is absolutely unfair, that this is a politically targeted indictment, and that, as Senator Rubio said, it's going to do more harm to the country than the prosecution would be worth. And so why is the Department of Justice even pursuing this? Brett, to that point, justice is supposed to be blind. It's not supposed to look at the politics of things. But when you're dealing with the unprecedented step of indicting a former president, and the closest anyone really ever came was Richard Nixon, and he was pardoned before it happened, is it worth it?
That's the question. And the prosecutors will say that they're following the law and that there's a clear intent here and that their evidence suggests that the president knew what he was doing as far as concealing these documents. The Trump team will say that, and we don't know what they'll say really as far as handling the documents and the specifics inside the indictment, but they clearly are making the case about a two-tiered system of justice, and Republicans are saying that. I think it's fascinating to watch the GOP candidates. Remember, this is happening in Miami. Obviously, the governor of Florida is running against the former president, Ron DeSantis. His comments about this have been to suggest that there are two tiers of justice and that the Biden investigation is slow and that the Hillary Clinton investigation went nowhere despite destroying 33,000 emails and destroying cell phones and the like. And talking about that is something that I think each of these candidates has hung on to. But there has been a bit of an evolution, and some of them, like Nikki Haley, like former Vice President Pence, who obviously worked for former President Trump in that White House, have said those things, the two-tier system, that talking point, but then said, but these charges as written are serious. Then you have others like Asa Hutchinson, former governor from Arkansas, who are very aggressive and say they want to hear all of the details, but that what they see in this indictment is troubling to them. So how they deal with this politically is really fascinating. But Senator Rubio's comments, I think, were clear, and that's probably the sentiment of most Republicans at this time.
All right. Hang with us if you would. Sandra?
All right. Thank you all. Fox News alert as we enter a brand new hour of America Reports. 2 o'clock on the East Coast. Former President Trump has arrived at the courthouse, set to be arraigned in that federal courtroom in Miami following the special counsel indictment. Welcome back as our breaking news coverage enters another hour. I'm Sandra Smith in New York. Great to have the team along with us as well today.
Good to have everybody here for this big news day. I'm John Roberts in Washington. We want to bring viewers who have just joined us up to speed on what's going on down there. Mark Meredith is live at the scene outside the courthouse in Miami. Mark, what's it look like from your vantage point?
John, good afternoon to you. I'd have to describe it as a circus. You've got local, national, international media. You've got onlookers and, of course, a large contingent of supporters of the former president all outside of this federal courthouse to try to see this moment in history. And it's going to be a day, of course, that's going to have an impact for months, if not years to come, because it'll have an impact on the Republican presidential race. We did not see Trump go into the courthouse from our vantage point. As you can imagine with the motorcade, we had a better shot from the air, but we know that he is now in the federal courthouse, only expected to be here a brief amount of time. And as you and Sandra have been talking about, this is a little bit old-fashioned. We're not going to see those cameras there in the courtroom. Getting information out is going to have to happen after the fact. But of course, we've got crews that have been waiting in line for hours to get in that courtroom for that moment, which is set to begin within the next hour or so. As for the former president, he has been very active on social media, once again claiming that this is a witch hunt, part of a political persecution, some of the same rhetoric that we've heard from him several times in the other investigations that have been ongoing. But for Trump, of course, this comes at a pivotal time, not only in his own presidential campaign, but of course because of all the other gathering forces that have been out there. As we've talked about, though, he's made it very clear that he feels that this has been a targeted attack by the Biden administration Justice Department. He's been very vocal in attacking the special counsel, Jack Smith. It's unlikely we're going to hear any sort of forceful pushback from the Justice Department. Instead, they're likely going to let the indictment speak for itself. We are hoping, though, we'll be able to pull a few quotes from the hearing after it concludes. As for Trump, what he's going to be doing after this, he'll be going up to New Jersey, his golf club, Bedminster, where he traditionally spends those summer months. As you can imagine, it's hotter than hell down here in Miami, so he usually heads back up north. But what he'll be doing there this evening is giving remarks to reporters, so certainly we'll get an indication of how he's feeling after today. We'll also be looking to see whether or not this will create any sort of dip in the polls for him. He's been leading the Republican presidential primary polls for months now, and of course we'll be looking to see whether or not this either boosts him further or if we'll see more of this candidate start to chip away at his lead. One of those candidates was even out here in Miami earlier this morning, Vivek Ramaswamy, calling that if the other candidates to support a potential pardon of Trump if he were to be convicted on any of those 37 counts that he'll be facing We'll be waiting to see if those other candidates respond. As for the Trump supporters that have been out here, we see those Trump 2024 flags. A lot of people, very strong feelings. Haven't seen any strong DeSantis support out here, an indication that this is going to be a very Trump-friendly crowd. Also seeing a ton of security, as you can imagine. There was a suspicious package earlier this morning that was deemed cleared pretty quickly, but obviously you have some heightened awareness of anything and everything that'll be happening in the few blocks surrounding this courthouse. Trump not going to be here very long, John, but we'll be looking to see if his legal team makes any comments. They set up a podium right outside the courthouse, so just about maybe 50 or 100 feet away from the door. So if those lawyers choose to speak, we believe that's where it would happen, but there's also a possibility that they'd wait for Trump to give his comments later this evening and kind of build up to that. John?
Yeah, I think the plan going in was that somebody would probably come out and address the crowd prior to the proceedings getting underway in the courthouse, but we'll see. The plans tend to be very fluid on an occasion like this. Sandra, when you look at the crowd out in front of the courthouse there, large in number, very enthusiastic in support of the former president, very peaceful as well. And the Miami mayor, Francis Suarez, has said that he wasn't going to do anything to try to separate the two sides, wasn't going to put up cordons or First Amendment pens or anything like that. But he did say that just in case things started to get heated, there would be a large security presence around the building to take care of things. But at the moment, things are very peaceful.
All right. Well, we know the former president is inside that courtroom, turning himself in a short time ago after the motorcade departed there in Miami. So Britt Hume is joining us now, Fox News chief political analyst. Britt, great to have you join us here. And quite a moment, quite a scene outside that federal courthouse there in Miami. What are your thoughts in this moment?
Well, as interesting and colorful as the activity outside the courthouse, of course, is, Senator, this moment inside is truly something we've never seen before in this country's history. A striking moment that will raise questions in people's minds about the impartiality of the Department of Justice, about the guilt or innocence of the former president. The Justice Department, you know, Sandra, exists at the intersection of law and politics, and it has to somehow manage to navigate that narrow passage between those two things and keep the department reputation where it needs to be, trusted by most people. That reputation is damaged these days, and this prosecution is going to add to that in the eyes of a great many people. And the presentation of the facts so far, as alleged in the indictment, may have gone some distance to repair that. But we haven't heard from the Trump side yet, and I'm very interested in hearing how his lawyers approach this. There's been no sign that Trump is going to deny that the things alleged and photographed even, and in some cases tape recorded in the indictment, did not happen. I think it'll more likely be an argument on whether they constituted a crime worth prosecuting or a crime at all, or whether they were legally based in terms of rulings about evidence and so on. So we've got a lot of ways to go here. It's going to be interesting.
And it will be a while, I think, Britt, before we hear Trump's side of the story, because he's represented by Todd Blanche and Christopher Kise for today's proceeding before the magistrate judge Jonathan Goodman, but he has still not lined up a legal team. He spent most of yesterday afternoon at Mar-a-Lago sitting down with prospective attorneys. That process, I'm told, continues today to some degree. Obviously, the president's got other things to attend to at the moment. But he's having some difficulty putting together a team. And as Marco Rubio was suggesting, given the political implications of taking on a case like this, and also given the logistical intricacies of having to get security clearance, et cetera, finding a law firm to take this on and finding a legal team may be very problematic for the former president.
Yeah, and suppose you're a lawyer thinking about possibly representing Donald Trump, and you see what Bill Barr said over the weekend, and then what Trump said about him, referring to him as a lowlife and so forth. Bill Barr was a former attorney general to begin with when he was named by President Trump to be his attorney general, and he represented the Department of Justice and the Trump administration, I think, effectively and well. And argued some legal theories to the benefit of the president. In the end, he resigned. Trump now claims he fired him. He didn't. And now he's been critical of the president, and look what's happening. So a lot of lawyers will look at things like that and the fate of other lawyers dismissed or otherwise not still on the team and wonder whether they want to get involved in that. I'm not sure I would if I were a lawyer.
Britt, I wanted to play out this sound from Chris Christie. He made a prediction saying there's a rocket docket in this Florida district and that the former president will likely go to trial this winter. Here's Christie.
They have something in South Florida called the rocket docket. They're a district, Southern District of Florida, that cares about the Speedy Trial Act, which says 70 days from the day of your initial appearance, which is tomorrow. Now, they won't do that because it's too complex a case. But could I see this case going to trial in 6 to 8 months from tomorrow? I could.
I'm going to get your reaction to that, Britt.
Well, there's a lot of room here, I think, and there will be challenges to the evidence. There will be pretrial motions and probably a lot of them, and I think that may be where the Trump defense relies heavily. For example, the subpoena, the warrant that was granted for the search at Mar-a-Lago, its legitimacy is likely to be challenged. And of course, if that challenge were to prevail, and that would mean that evidence gathered in that raid at Mar-a-Lago would be inadmissible. That would damage some, and not to some extent, all of the counts. There'll be other sorts of legal challenges, and there will be an argument made. I think this would probably have to come before the jury, but it would say, look, where's the damage here? Yes. He did hold on to these documents, and yes, some of them involved national security information that shouldn't have been waved around or even kept where it was. But where's any evidence that our national security was harmed? Yes, it was dangerous to do that, but if nobody was harmed, is anybody really convict a former president in a case in which something was done that was wrong but that didn't really harm the national security when it's a national security case? I mean, you can see it even this early. The outlines of arguments can be made by his lawyers, both before the trial and at the trial.
So speak, if you would, Brett, to what Senator Marco Rubio said just a minute ago. And Mark Levin said the day that the indictment came down, very much what you're saying. Where is the harm here? Where was the risk to national security in a former president who knew all of this information, having these documents in his possession? Senator Rubio said, is it worth risking the division to this country by bringing a prosecution against the former president? What do you say to that?
I say that is the question that was confronted by the Attorney General and by the prosecutors in this case. And I think it's a close call. You can see in the presence in the street the level of public sentiment about this, much of it being displayed there, of course, against this indictment and in favor of the former president. But this move, by a Department of Justice already under fire, in some cases quite legitimately so, for its past decisions involving other similar cases. No cases exactly like any other, but the similarities, for example, to the Hillary Clinton case are pretty striking. And she was allowed to skate by an FBI director who said that no reasonable prosecutor would bring the case against her. I think a lot of people look at that and say, wait a minute. She shouldn't have skated, and if she did, he should, speaking of President Trump. So, yeah, the Justice Department, it's for the law, of course. That's what it's about. But it's also about public confidence in its deliberations and its actions. And that is likely in many quarters to be shaken by this indictment, and there's no getting around that. Now, whether in the end, on balance, it was the right decision remains to be seen. But we're seeing right now in the streets of Miami and in public sentiment reflected in the polls that this is a move that further divides this country.
Just going to add to what is happening inside the courthouse, since there's no cameras allowed there. The former president has been processed ahead of his arraignment in this classified documents case. That is per a court official just a few moments ago. Also, Britt, the Trump aide Walt Nauta also has been booked in the documents case. That, according to a court official just a few moments ago. We are at the mercy of the court officials, Britt, because we know the journalists that are in there cannot have devices, so they will not be able to transmit what exactly they're seeing and hearing in the courtroom. But certainly, what is seen outside of that courthouse, Britt?
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. I imagine the scene is like that anywhere. There was a time not very long ago, Sandra, when reporters would go dashing madly out of a courtroom like that and run for the nearest phone booth. Those days are gone, of course. And if you're not allowed to have a cell phone inside, there's not a lot you can do except come out later and relate what by that time has become old news.
You know, my question is, Brett, what's a phone booth? But those were the good old days. We have some video that we want to play out here. Melania Trump entering the courthouse just a short time ago. There she is, just out of the vehicle and now going toward the courthouse. Just trying to nail down whether or not we are in fact going to hear from a representative from the Trump legal team. That was the initial plan, but I'm not sure if that's going to hold at this point or not. As you can imagine, with everything going on today and unfolding fast and furious as it is, plans do change. We want to bring in Byron York. And Byron, maybe you can address this question that is outstanding in all of this. When we talk about why this prosecution was brought against the former president, when you take a look at the indictment, when you take a look at the DOJ's side of the story, you say, okay, so there is a fairly extensive and detailed accusation against the former president for improperly having classified documents and then trying to hide them when the National Archives and the FBI came calling for them. But in the same breath, if you take a look at the situation with the classified documents regarding President Biden, he had documents from his time when he was a senator. And there is no reason for a senator to have a classified document in his or her possession. They're allowed to look at them in a sensitive compartmented information facility, a SCIF, but they're not allowed to take them. That's breaking the law. So why does Biden skate here? As Britt said, Hillary Clinton skated. Why does Biden skate here, but the former president does not?
Well, the Biden investigation is still going on, although we haven't heard a word about it, nothing from the special counsel in that case. If Biden did something like that as a senator, it was quite a long time ago. But the fact is, he does, the president, in this case, the former
Byron, I'm sorry for interrupting. Stay with us. Here's Alina Habba, member of Trump's legal team representative.
Hillary Clinton. Joe Biden himself retained possession of classified documents that have not been prosecuted. And none of them came into possession of those documents while they were president. None of them were president, who as the head and sole member of the executive branch has the power to summarily declassify documents. The decision to pursue charges against President Trump while turning a blind eye to others is emblematic of the corruption that we have here. We are at a turning point in our nation's history. The targeting, prosecution of a leading political opponent is the type of thing you see in dictatorships like Cuba and Venezuela. It is commonplace there for rival candidates to be prosecuted, persecuted, and put into jail. What is being done to the President Trump should terrify all citizens of this country. These are not the ideals that our democracy is founded upon. This is not our America. Thank you.
So what's happening right now inside the courthouse? Has he been arrested? Has he been fingerprinted? Has a mugshot been taken? Walk us through what's happening here now.
President Trump is in a very unique position where he doesn't need to be given a mugshot, obviously. He is not a flight risk. He is the leading candidate of the GOP at the moment. He is going through a process that has been coordinated with Secret Service, and it will all be handled seamlessly.
And the attorneys, what is his state of mind? Just real quick, how is he feeling?
He's defiant.
He's defiant.
All right, Alina Habba there, spokesperson for President Trump. Byron, let's get back to you because she was talking about exactly what you were speaking to.
Yes, well, what you heard there was the political defense in the Trump case. And it drives Democrats crazy for Trump to say, well, what about Hillary Clinton? Although we know even from the indictment itself that Trump was thinking about the Hillary Clinton case quite a bit. In the indictment, he's alleged to have mentioned a lawyer for Hillary Clinton who helped destroy 30,000+ of her emails. So look, the fact is, in 2016, right after the July 4th weekend, the FBI basically put its thumb on the scale in favor of Hillary Clinton, saying that she would not be further investigated, she would not be charged. If anybody remembers that, James Comey, then the director of the FBI, he wasn't really the person who should have done it, but he's the guy who did the news conference. And he spent a long time talking about how guilty she was. And then he said at the end, but we're not going to prosecute. So this does drive Democrats crazy. They call it whataboutism. But it is, in fact, a precedent, not an exact precedent. As far as what Trump is doing, if you look in the indictment, there's special emphasis on papers that were actually picked up by the FBI during that infamous raid on August 8th of last year, the search warrant raid on Mar-a-Lago, and those being papers that Trump had defiantly kept after being asked to return them, after getting a subpoena to return them, and after resisting a great amount. So the indictment focuses on the papers that Trump went the greatest distance to try to keep from returning to the government.
Byron, we're continuing to look at, it seems the crowds are growing as the president is still there inside of the courthouse. He turned himself in what has to be probably a good 25 minutes ago. We saw the motorcade enter. We did not see him. He was taken through a different entrance where cameras could not catch a glimpse. But this is not expected to be a long proceeding. He will likely to be departing, and this is the crowd he'll see, Byron.
Well, you know, the fact that the former president is going back to Bedminster, where he has an event tonight, fundraising, is expected to make remarks. The whole thing is already set up, just shows how incredibly unusual this case is. And the crowd outside the courthouse says the same thing. Trump is very aware of the support that he has among Republicans. We've seen some quickie polls in the last few days after the indictment that have shown huge majorities of Republicans believe the indictment is politically motivated. And if you talk to Republican voters anywhere, even the ones who want to move on from Trump now, they will say he was really unfairly targeted for years, starting in 2016. And what those Republican-based supporters have done with this new indictment is simply fit it in to what they think is a pre-existing pattern of unfair targeting by the Justice Department, in this case, the Biden Justice Department, and that has made them support Trump even more. And I think everything you see Trump do from today, who knows how far along, will be to maximize his support and turn what's happening now to him now into continued support from Republicans.
So we just want to clarify something, Byron. We thought that was Melania Trump who was arriving. Apparently, it was not Melania. So apologies for that. But a day like today with so many comings and goings, it's easy from a distance to mistake two people. Byron, what do you think is ultimately, it was Margot Martin who was working in the lower press office during the presidency and then departed to work for President Trump as an assistant at Mar-a-Lago and at Bedminster. So just back to what we were talking about, what do you think is the political impact of all of this for the president in the campaign going forward?
Well, we've already seen what happened after one indictment, the local indictment in Manhattan, which seemed to really raise Trump's support significantly among Republican voters. Now, the question is this going to do the same thing or keep that support high in the continued future? Because Trump has, if you look at the Real Clear Politics average of polls, a 30-plus point lead over Ron DeSantis in this race. Or will there be an effect in which the evidence in this indictment will begin to sink in which Trump's opponents will find a way to use it against Trump without alienating the Republicans whose support they need? Will we see a process where Trump's support begins to erode? Right now, it's just too soon after this federal indictment to know what's going to happen.
No, in fact, it's going in the opposite direction, Byron, and the president continues to note that himself.
Yeah, well, his support is just enormous at this moment, and it presented his opponents, this indictment, with just a terrible dilemma. First of all, a lot of them believe that Trump was unfairly targeted. They're among those Republicans I was discussing earlier, and so they want to come out and they want to tell the voters that yes, they believe too that Trump has been unfairly targeted. But of course, they're running against Donald Trump. If he loses support, it helps them. So they have kind of a conflict here, and you've seen a few of them, like Nikki Haley, come out and say, well, you know, this is really pretty serious. If it's true, it's really bad. But others, everybody's being very, very careful now, because if this indictment is going to raise support among Republicans for Trump, they don't want to help that along any more than they can.
Just wanted to add in here that the White House press briefing is ongoing. And as you can imagine, there are a lot of questions about what is happening right now. The White House is mostly avoiding or dodging those questions, as you can imagine, based on the president also in the Oval Office just a few moments ago was asked by reporters to comment, and he said nothing. Adding this as well for your reaction, Byron, the top Republican in the Senate says he will not comment on whether he would support Donald Trump if the former president receives his party's presidential nomination. This was just a few moments ago on Capitol Hill. Mitch McConnell saying, I'm not going to start commenting on the various candidates we have running for president. He was telling this to reporters minutes after the president arrived there at the courthouse. So he says he will not say if he would support Donald Trump as the nominee. Your reaction to that, Byron?
Boy, that's some of the least surprising news in the world. There is no love lost. No love lost between Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump. What's happening in the Senate is really, really interesting. Remember, a handful of senators actually voted to remove Trump during his second impeachment on the way out. And now they have a very popular senator, Tim Scott, who is running. And Senator John Thune, I believe, has come out and supported Tim Scott. And there are other senators who are likely to support Tim Scott. So a lot of senators look at this and say, there is absolutely no reason I need to stick my neck out on what's going on with former President Trump right now.
All right, Byron, hang with us. We want to come back to Brett Baer here. A boisterous crowd out in front of the federal courthouse, but a peaceful crowd out there. Most of them, I would think, voicing their support for the former president as he's inside and the proceedings are underway.
I think my mentor and friend Britt Hume said it best, which is this is historic. We've not seen anything like this, and there hasn't been. We've had these moments, but this has never happened for a president to be charged under the Espionage Act. And just talking to some legal experts about this, and this is where this may start to be the defense's take. You know, why? Why did the DOJ move forward with this? The Presidential Records Act, 1978, was originally had a civil process tied to it. It's not mentioned in this indictment. The Espionage Act is. This has criminalized this based on the national security documents. The Presidential Records Act is designed for presidents, and there is a real argument about whether they can take the documents, where that line is. Lyndon Johnson took documents. We referenced Bill Clinton and what ended up happening in that administration.
With Sandy Berger
and Sandy Berger and the Sox.
And he took them out of the archives.
Out of the archives. So there's a real question about the criminalization of this. They lay it out in the documents as a national security issue. But there is some argument to be made about this, and you've seen the former president kind of touch on that a little bit, but his legal defense may go down this really interesting road about the difference between the Espionage Act from 1917 and the Presidential Records Act of 1978, and whether, if he wasn't turning over the documents, it should have been a civil process first. Once you start criminalizing, you get people in, they start testifying under deposition, you flip them, and it becomes all kinds of different things. That's some of the defense argument that they may start to make. Whether it's successful or not, we don't know.
Right.
All right, let's bring in Jonathan Turley. Andy McCarthy still joining us as well. Why don't you expand on that for us, Jonathan Turley?
Well, the government's going to argue that, yes, this began as a Presidential Records Act matter, but that the archives then informed the FBI that they believed there was classified documents in an unsecure location. And the government's effectively saying, yeah, we switched horses. We viewed that as a classified documents case, a national security case. They probably will get support on that argument by the Court of Appeals if this does get challenged and go above the trial court. There are issues here. You know, this is an odd fit. Many people were sort of repelled by 31 counts alleging Espionage Act violations. That act does talk about mishandling, but it also has an intent standard to harm national security or to help some foreign adversary. Nobody is arguing that there's evidence of harm to national security or an intent to do so. In fact, if you read the government's indictment, they seem to be sort of latching on a different motivation. In talking about that audio tape, they're treating it sort of like a trophy, that maybe these documents were kept by the president out of vanity. Well, that may be true, but it then has a hard fit with an Espionage Act claim, and that's the majority of these counts.
Hey, Jonathan, Brett wants to ask you something here. I just want to make sure his mic is open.
Well, thanks. I just have one thing, Jonathan, and that is something Senator Rubio talked about, and you've just touched on, and that is the harm. We understand what the statute is, what they're going down with the indictment as they allege, but the harm here and whether national security was harmed and whether that factors in potentially. Was there a document destroyed? Was there a document that was somehow accessed or given to the press or some foreign entity? Was there harm here in understanding how they're handled, but does that factor into the legal aspects of this?
I think it will. Quite frankly, some of us have been critics of the Espionage Act for our entire careers. Those of us in the free speech community, this is a horrific act. It was designed to crack down on political dissidents. It has been used in some of the worst cases in our history. So you'll find very few supporters of this act among certainly the free speech community. And this really gets to it, that is, the government often reaches for the Espionage Act of 1917 when they don't have other options. It is the sort of all-purpose act that they can use to go after targeted individuals. This may be a bridge too far, certainly for many people in the public. You know, they will argue that the harm was the mishandling, but there's another statute dealing with the taking of classified documents. They clearly didn't want to go under that statute. But in putting so much of this on the Espionage Act, they're really sort of, you know, raising in the public's mind whether this is too clever by half. You know, that, you know, the fact is that even if the Trump people knock out those 31 counts, they still have 6 counts that they have to deal with. But the question for some in the public will be, well, why not? Why did you just focus on those 6 counts? Why did you have to count stack and say that this is an espionage case?
Andy, you want to jump in here on that?
Yeah, I respectfully disagree with both the commentary about the Presidential Records Act and the Espionage Act. As far as the Presidential Records Act is concerned, I must say I'm tempted to say that the argument is frivolous. What President Trump is accused of hoarding down at Mar-a-Lago is not presidential records. These are agency reports. Their agency reports are not what the Presidential Records Act is directed at. It's not even clear that they would count as presidential records, but in terms of what he's allowed to keep as personal records, there's not a conceivable contention that the information that was down there is covered, because what personal records under the Act are is things in the nature of diaries and journals and the like. This doesn't come close to that. This is agency reporting. And on the Espionage Act, you know, the word espionage doesn't appear in any of the codified provision of the crimes that went into federal law as a result of the Espionage Act. There are various prongs to it. There's a series of crimes that go from things that are very serious, like what people traditionally think of as espionage, down to crimes that address a very specific group of potential defendants. Government officials who are trusted with national security information, who hold it in unauthorized circumstances, that is, in a place where it doesn't belong, and who willfully retain it when there is a demand made by the government from somebody who is lawfully enabled to have it. So what President Trump is accused of is that part of the Espionage Act. It's irrelevant whether there was an intent to harm the United States or not. That's not a defense to this charge. What the charge is he was unauthorized to have it, he willfully retained it, they demanded to have it back, and he refused. That's the crime.
Very interesting. Martha McCallum still with us. Ahead of you taking over at 3 o'clock, just want to get this in here as well. The White House was just asked about the president's message amid this Trump indictment. She cited the Hatch Act, Karine Jean-Pierre, and said, we're going to go back to what the president ran on in 2020, bringing people together, she said, and that is what he has been doing. He is the president for everyone. It's important that the president continues to bring the country together, and that is the message, the future of this country. That's his message to the American people. That has not changed.
You know, I would just point out with regard to the interesting discussion between Andy and Jonathan about this issue of harm. Now, as a legal matter, it takes on one sort of level of understanding, but it will be argued outside of the legal matter with the American people in terms of whether or not any harm was done. And we heard a similar argument when it came to the Stormy Daniels situation, if you may remember. The argument then was made that nobody was harmed in this. In fact, she ended up owing him more money than she was paid off in the end. So that became an issue. But one of the questions that raises for me, in terms of, you know, the public's ability to absorb all this, how much they care about it, whether or not they've already made their mind up about how all of this works. Jonathan, you know, maybe I could ask you, is there, do you think, regret? You know, is it difficult for Jack Smith that this is the second time that we have watched the president indicted? And does it wear down public opinion about what they think about all of this? Because they watched the process happen in New York. Now it's happening again in Miami, many of them will say.
So, Martha,
I think it...
Oh, I'm sorry, Jonathan, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I think it does have an impact, particularly if you now have the Georgia case coming in August. You're going to have these bookends. So this is going to be sandwiched between two cases that many believe are political and rather raw political prosecutions. I think in New York, that is certainly well established. And that's going to undermine this even further. And I think your point is also a good one initially at the outset. I agree with Andy about everything he said about the standard. The statute does refer to harm and espionage, but he's right. As I noted, this specifically deals with the question of mishandling, and the government will say that is the crime and that is the harm. So he's right about that. But when it comes to how the public views this as the necessity of bringing these claims under the Espionage Act, I think that he may be talking to an empty room. I mean, the DOJ may have lost its audience because of its history of targeting Trump, and that's the audience they're going to have to pick this jury from.
Yeah. Hey, Martha, one more thought to you, because Senator Marco Rubio was talking about what the cost to the country is going to be in terms of dividing the country and attacks on the former president and attacks on the special counsel's office. According to Fox News Digital, Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida has sent a letter to Attorney General Merrick Garland asking for all of the names that are on the prosecution team. Gates is contending that one of the prosecutors previously contributed to President Biden's campaign in 2020 and faced misconduct allegations in 2009. Again, this is a story that's just breaking on Fox News Digital. So, you know, the political battle is escalating here by the moment. And that goes to what Rubio was talking about, is in bringing this prosecution, in weighing whether or not it, as James Comey said, a reasonable prosecutor would bring a case. You know, what's the political cost to and the social cost to the country going to be?
You know, I think that's what has worn down people's confidence, very sadly, in these processes. You remember the discussion during the Russia investigation about Mueller's team and where their political allegiances lie. We heard similar things about the team that was involved in Hillary Clinton's investigation, that she got, you know, sort of a very friendly July 2nd, I believe it was, discussion with the attorneys, and then it was all sort of crossed off the list. And I think people have gotten to a point where they watch these things and they say it's all political. And that is a very sad situation for the country to be in at this point. And it just, again, raises the question in my mind as we look forward in this political scene, because I think that everything has changed since Donald Trump came on the scene, right? And we talk a lot over the course of political campaigns about whether or not there's room for a third-party candidate. But there is the possibility, when you look at this Ukraine story and these recordings that Grassley talked about last night, and we're going to continue to dig in on that on the story, you know, do the American people at some point say, you know what, a pox on all your houses, we want another choice? So that's something that I'm going to watch very closely as we, you know, kind of move forward in all of this. But clearly the support is very strong still for President Trump. But we'll watch as this wears on.
All right, Martha, we're going to let you get ready for your 3 o'clock hour and coverage of this. Thanks, because you'll know a whole lot more at 3 o'clock. Martha, thank you. Just an update here. Eric Trump, the president's son, the former president's son, accompanied his father to the federal courthouse. On their departure, they were seen waving before they climbed into the vehicle. He rode to the courthouse with his father. That, of course, is when we saw on social media that the former president sent out a message and called this a witch hunt. His lawyer outside of the courthouse a short time ago saying today is not about President Donald J. Trump, who is defiant. It's not about the Republican Party. It's not about 2024 election. It is about the destruction of longstanding principles that have set this country apart. Now with an update, former President Donald Trump is not the only one appearing in court today. His aide, Walt Nauta, joining him at the defense table. Rich Edson has something to tell us about that. He joins us now. Rich, jump on in here.
Yeah, good afternoon, Sandra. Well, you know, Walt Nauta has been by the former president's side. Back when he was president in the White House, it was a role that he took when he was working in the White House mess. He was in the Navy at the time. And then when Donald Trump left the White House, he moved down to Florida with him, retired from the Navy, and served as his valet or his assistant. That's a role that's fairly common among senior members in Washington, whether it's senior members on Capitol Hill, former presidents. If you need a Diet Coke, if you need a clean shirt, if you need a task done, if you need to move boxes around your house, this is the type of staffer who gets that done. And it's that last thing that's really gotten him in trouble here. According to the Department of Justice, according to this indictment, he's involved in this. He's been indicted. He's at the courthouse with the former president right now. He's facing 6 counts in relation to all of this, some 90 years maximum in prison because of this. And basically what prosecutors are saying he did was, at the direction of the former president, he moved dozens of boxes around Mar-a-Lago just around the time that the former president's lawyers were going to examine these boxes that had come from the White House to see if there was any classified material in them to send back per the request from the U.S. government. According also to the indictment, they say, you know, he was moving these boxes around. Some had disappeared in that process. And then also when he was asked about it, because he was talking to investigators last year, he wasn't truthful about that. So these are the charges that he faces. This is what the government is accusing him of doing here. He did not cooperate or stopped cooperating at some point last year with the federal government. And that has been something that the federal government has tried to pursue with Walt Nauta. He's remained by the former president's side. You can see him on the campaign trail. You can see him at speeches, just like it's his job and responsibility to do here. So he is very much a part of this. It's an indictment that has two names in it, and it's Donald Trump and Walt Nauta here. He's been standing by the president's side for since his time in the White House and is doing so today at a defense table.
All right, Rich Edson on that news for us. Rich, we will get back to you again soon. Thank you so much. John?
Rich, thank you. Let's get back to Britt Hume, Fox News chief political analyst. So according to the charging document, Britt, there was an audio recording of a meeting that took place where former President Trump was talking to a person who's writing a new book for Mark Meadows, and that this conversation was recorded. This goes to the idea that the former president has said that he declassified these documents, and so there's no there there. But if we could bring up call for number 3 here. This is the way, according to the indictment, the conversation went. The former president was showing apparently this plan of attack that was drafted by a senior military official. We believe the country was Iran. According to Trump, it's like highly confidential, secret. This is secret information. See, as president, I could have declassified it. Now I can't, you know, but this is still a secret. Staffer says, yeah, now we have a problem. Former President Trump, isn't that interesting? So this would seem to contradict, on the surface at least, the former president's claim, Brett, that he declassified all of this stuff. There he is, according to the indictment, saying, I could have declassified it, but I didn't. But then again, we've got an audio recording of him saying this, but can we verify that that in fact was the document? I mean, is there any room here for his defense to go with this and pick it apart?
Well, apparently they don't have the document. So we don't know what that document, that might eat away at their ability to make hay with that particular document. It does seem to blow up the argument that actually I, you know, one way or another declassified these things while I could. He said in this particular case he didn't, or he said he could have, but now he can't. So that pretty much settles that. So that's certainly a strong piece of evidence. I think that is, and it's caught the eye of a lot of observers who wondered, you know, just exactly how strong the evidence would be. Well, if this tape recording comes in at trial and stands up, it seems to me that's a big point in the government's favor.
Britt, just another update from the White House press briefing where Jackie Heinrich was able to get a question in with Karine Jean-Pierre asking about the recorded conversations with the president and his son Hunter Biden and Burisma. She responded, that is malarkey. But going back to what we know is happening in the courtroom in Miami, our producer is in that courtroom, Britt, just getting some updates here. We will not get updates from him, of course, because any journalists in the room had to leave their devices out of that courtroom as required by the judge overseeing this case. So we won't get any updates till they leave the courtroom. But we do have this. Trump has local counsel, so he will enter a plea, and there will be a formal arraignment. More as we get it. That's what we know at this point. Brett, as we continue to look at these live pictures, we should know more in just a few moments, Brett.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to keep an eye as this goes forward on Walt Nauta, because he obviously, now having been charged, you know, he's on paper at least, he's a small fish, but he's been at the president's side during all of this. He would make a wonderful witness for the prosecution if he were to decide that rather than risk being convicted and going to jail over this, that you know, the smartest thing for him to do would be to flip. I'm not sure the government, you know, how hard the government's going to try to flip him, but those charges are impressive against him for somebody like that, and I think, you know, that's worth keeping an eye on as the trial goes. So far, he's sticking with the boss, and he may continue to, but if he doesn't, look out.
Yeah, that local counsel, by the way, is Christopher Kides. He's the former Solicitor General of Florida, one of two people representing the former president today. Todd Blanche, who's handling the New York case, is the other one. But the former president, Britt, continues to try to search for a legal team to see him through all of this. We should also point out that the judge that he is appearing before today is the magistrate judge Jonathan Goodman, but Judge Aileen Cannon, who is a Trump appointee, is on the docket to oversee at least the very beginning of this case. And when you take a look, Britt, at her, she had that ruling that was very favorable to the former president last year, in which she said, well, wait a minute, we're going to put the DOJ's investigation, the FBI investigation on hold here over these documents because we're going to appoint a special master to look through them to see which documents the DOJ and the FBI actually have access to, because some of these may belong to the former president. Well, the DOJ took that to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, and two other Trump-appointed judges shot that down and overturned her. So based on that ruling, she's going into this with, critics would say, a strike against her. And literally, every move that she makes in this case, Britt, is going to be under heavy scrutiny. So again, when we come back to Marco Rubio and the cost of this prosecution, add in the federal district judge there as a person whose life is going to be wholly affected by the political ramifications of this, not just the legal ones.
Well, that's right, John, and I think, you know, in this case in particular, based on what we can sort of surmise about it now, the Trump defense is going to depend a lot on legal rulings. You haven't heard anybody on the Trump side, not the son, not Trump himself, come out and say, I didn't do these things, I didn't hold on to these documents, the stuff you see, the photographs that show them in the bathroom, and it was the bathroom with the chandelier, are not real. We're not hearing that. What we're hearing is, you know, we're going to defend this, and questions raised about the legality of the investigation and the case itself, and that, of course, is going to depend. The outcome of all that is going to depend on rulings by this judge, if indeed she ends up ultimately hearing the case.
Hey, Byron York is still with us as well, looking at the political implications of all of this. When will we know, really, the impact, as we are still awaiting this official appearance at 3 o'clock Eastern time?
Well, I hate to say I don't know, but I don't know. Obviously, there are a number of events that are kind of milestone events going forward. And what we'll really see the Republican race pick up in August. The Iowa State Fair begins August the 10th. And that's a time when you'll see a lot of the candidates cycling through August. And then on August the 23rd, there'll be the Fox News debate. And that'll be very, very important for us to get a read on what the other candidates are going to say about this case. Obviously, it'll be further down the road. Maybe our thinking about it will have changed a little bit. But I would look at that debate, whether or not Trump attends, it's going to be something that the other candidates are going to have to talk about. I would look at that debate as a time when people really start to sort of put their flag out and decide where they're going to stand on this.
All right. Bret Baier is still with us as he collects a lot of wool for his terrific program tonight at 6 o'clock special report. So what's the political upshot of this for the former president? When you take a look at the latest polls, he's further ahead now than he was before he was indicted by Alvin Bragg. And I expect that polls taken after today will probably shoot him up even higher.
I agree with you, and I think that that's what we've seen in recent weeks, likely to see today. To Martha's point earlier, there may be a candidate or candidates who tap into this thought about chaos and want to, have Trump policies, but not all of this around it. That may be an argument that they make, some candidates, and maybe it starts to stick. We don't know. Right now, what we see is a big lead for the former president and a defiant former president who will have an event tonight at his golf club in Bedminster that will be a fundraiser, and he will again speak to his faithful and his base that is sticking with him. There are some questions about this indictment and about the reasons why he had these documents. Why does he have the documents after he's asked to turn them all in? Why does he keep those documents? And the why part, we really don't have an answer to as of yet, and it's going to be fascinating to hear the Trump defense talk about all of that.
Yeah, I was puzzled by that too. Why was he so determined to hang on to some of these documents? I mean, a letter from Kim Jong-un, which allegedly is among the trove of documents, you can understand that because he forged a personal relationship with him. It's something he probably wanted to keep. But if we wanted to put it in the library, that's where you negotiate with the archives and say, can we downgrade this so that it can be part of the library? You have to get inside his head to know that.
Yes. And we hope to. I'll have an interview on Monday, June 19th at Bedminster. That'll be pretty in-depth. It's still on track. We've triple confirmed it, so we'll be there Monday the 19th.
Well, we look forward to the answer to that question.
Here you go.
Just an update here. Byron York still with us as well. As the former president has been in the courthouse, obviously going through the procedures there, we are just getting word that he has entered the courtroom for his arraignment hearing in this classified documents case. That is the latest out of the courthouse. It's going to be, the updates will sort of be far and few between, as the communications will be lacking for a little bit. But it looks like things are happening on time there. Byron, a final thought for you as we're wrapping this hour.
Well, I think one theory about why the former president did keep this stuff, there are two possible reasons. One is souvenirs. He really liked mementos. His office in New York's filled with them. And the letter from Kim Jong-un would fit into that. He was really, he was taken with those letters that he got from Kim Jong-un. He read them to people in the Oval Office. He thought they were quite amusing. A second possibility is revenge, or self-defense as well. What we've heard about the whole General Milley thing and Iran, and those are just reports right now, but having a document from General Milley would be a defense for the president against any accusation that he, the president, might have been thinking about invading Iran. So I think the president either had a personal or a political motive for keeping a number of these documents.
Yeah, the whole context of that battle plan for Iran was the former president saying, people said it was my idea to attack Iran. No, here's the document. Look at the name that's on the top of that document. Wasn't my idea. That idea was written up by somebody else. Britt, put a button on it here for us as we await the former president to come out and head back to the airport to travel back up to New Jersey.
Well, you've been talking about the political ramifications of this, but it's been discussed so far mostly in terms of how this affects the Republican primaries and former President Trump's chances of getting the nomination again. I think there's a widespread sense that while it may not hurt his chances of getting the Republican nomination, I think if we look reasonably at a general election situation, it's an entirely different matter altogether. As has been noted, President Trump certainly does motivate a significant segment of the Republican base, maybe not a majority, but a significant plurality, enough to win a lot of primaries. But I think it's fair to say that he motivates about 100% of the Democratic base, and not in a good way for him. So is it possible to imagine, really, a scenario in which people who went out and voted for Joe Biden, with all of his frailties, to be president in 2020 to avoid Donald Trump, are going to come back 4 years later after all that's happened, after January 6th, after the attempts to overturn the election and all the rest of it, and the criminal charges against him, and vote for him now? Maybe there are a few, but I don't think there are very many. And I think his general election chances are harmed by all these prosecutions, whether they are fair or not.
Just getting another update here. The Trump arraignment hearing has officially begun in this classified documents case. And a little bit of color from the courtroom. The former president is currently in the courtroom. That is confirmed now, with his counsel sitting next to him. The prosecutors are in their place, and Jack Smith is in the front row. More as we get it. A final thought from you, Jonathan Turley.
One of the things that I'd be looking for is also whether the judge discusses with the former president public comments. He's planning a rally tonight, which is not what you normally see from someone who has been arraigned. And this is going to raise one of the most difficult questions in this case. To what extent does a federal judge feel comfortable telling a candidate for president you're not allowed to talk about a case when the election itself is going to be talking a lot about the case? I mean, Trump is clearly going to run on this case. This fulfills his narrative and his view of a weaponized criminal justice system. Usually, defendants are subject to these gag orders, but this is not your usual defendant. So it's not clear if the court's going to touch on that subject or ask for more briefing.
Well, I think it's in true Trump fashion, Jonathan, to hold a news conference after a day like today, and we will see that tonight in the 8 o'clock hour here on Fox News. Thank you all for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us, everybody. Our coverage will continue. Heck of a couple hours here, John. Great to be with you. I'm Sandra Smith.
Another monumental day. It just doesn't stop. 7 years and running now. I'm John Roberts. The Story with Martha picks it up from here. Martha?
It's good to be with you guys earlier today, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm Martha McCallum. So breaking right now on The Story, this procedure is now underway in the Miami courthouse as history unfolds today. The first ever former American president has now been charged with federal crimes and is being arraigned inside the Florida courthouse. Former President Trump faces 37 counts of handling of classified documents after he left office. That he illegally retained those documents is the charge of most of those charges. Espionage charges are among them as well. Mark Thiessen, Andy McCarthy, former FBI agent Nicole Parker joining us as well, and Juan Williams, all following along as we watch this play out in real time live this afternoon as we wait for the president to finish and to come out. First to correspondent Mark Meredith, who is live there outside the courthouse in Miami. Hello there. Hi, Mark.
Martha, hello to you. The story at this hour is two very different scenes. One, what's happening inside the courtroom. You got the former president of the United States sitting with his legal team, and across the aisle you have the special counsel in the Justice Department ready to begin this long and lengthy process following the indictment that was unsealed last week that shows the former president will face 37 different felony charges as a result of allegedly holding on to these classified documents and not turning them back over to the government as they were seeking them. That's what's happening inside. Outside the federal courthouse here in Miami, a very different story. You've got a media spectacle where you have both Trump supporters and Trump critics out here ready to make their opinions very well known. We have seen a couple hundred people that have continued to just kind of circle the courthouse for the last few hours, almost like a Trump parade, if you will, waving flags, Trump 2024 flags, making it clear they want to show their support for the former president. The spokesperson for the former president came out right as the former president was going into the courthouse to kind of give an update where things stand. She said that he is feeling defiant as he gets ready to face these charges. Here's what she had to say just a few moments ago.
Today is not about President Donald J. Trump, who is defiant. It is not about the Republican Party. It is not about the 2024 election. It is about the destruction of the long-standing American principles that have set this country apart for so long.
And that is likely a message that Trump is going to echo a little bit later on tonight. He's not going to be staying in Florida very long. After this proceeding wraps up, we are expecting him to head actually out to the airport and then make his way to New Jersey. It looks like they're kind of flagging. There's somebody coming out. Looks like, okay, so what we're seeing right now is people run out of the courthouse. Likely these are the people that were with media outlets that had a chance to kind of gather what was going on. People are running. This is the marathon that happens after any sort of federal hearing. These people that were inside the courtroom that can give us those details because, as you know, Martha, there are no cameras are allowed, no electronic devices. So it's just a pen and pad that we then get the information firsthand. So the people that are running out of the courthouse right now, an indication, we get some preliminary information as to what's been happening. We should have it for you here in just a couple seconds. Martha?
Old school reporting there, as there are no cameras inside, so reporters are in there running out with their reflections, thoughts about what they're seeing in there. We do know that the president has pled not guilty, as expected. That happened just moments ago. With that, let's bring in our panel. Andy McCarthy, former federal prosecutor and Fox News contributor. Nicole Parker joining us now, former FBI special agent with over 12 years of experience. She left the Bureau after she says that it became politically weaponized. And Juan Williams, Fox News senior political analyst. Great to have all of you with us. Nicole, we haven't heard from you this afternoon, so let me start with you. Your reaction to what we've seen so far, and a huge crowd, mostly, it looks to my eye, mostly Trump supporters out there. I saw a couple of lock him up signs, but most of them seem to be waving Trump flags. Your thoughts?
I am from Miami. I was an FBI agent here in the Southern District of Florida. I was at the courthouse yesterday doing some work with Fox, and this is a historical day in the history of the United States. You know, the standard procedures as an FBI agent when we bring someone in is that you're going to first take them to the U.S. Marshals for processing. That's probably what President Trump did. He was moved in then to the courtroom, and under Judge Goodman's jurisdiction, the proceedings took place. The initial appearance, you know, went along with the arraignment. They likely waived the, you know, the formal reading of the indictment. He had counsel present. He entered a plea of not guilty. And at that moment, you know, he demanded what we call, you demand trial by jury. And he has the right to a speedy trial, which is within 70 days of his initial appearance. And then there is a standing discovery order. And that is within 14 days, he will begin receiving discovery from the federal government and the prosecution to see what they have on him. You know, they likely stipulated to a bond in advance, and President Trump will be on his way back to New Jersey, from what I understand, after these proceedings. You know, it's important for viewers to understand that this initial court proceeding was before Judge Goodman. He is a magistrate judge in the Southern District of Florida, and we know that Judge Cannon has been appointed as the, you know, the district judge who will hear the proceedings of this trial. And she was randomly selected. Judge Goodman, he is the magistrate judge this week, and that is why the proceedings are taking place in his courtroom today.
Nicole, stay with you for one more question, just because you are so familiar with Miami. We saw the cars pull out of the Doral. We know that Eric Trump, the former president's son, was with him. There was a huge number of Miami police officers who were on motorcycles on the way in. And we're going to hear, I'm sure, some thoughts from the president after he comes out, and certainly tonight when he speaks at the Bedminster Golf Club. But I remember when he was arraigned here in New York City, because now we have some experience with this, he said that people were crying, the people who were processing him. You know, there were some questions about whether or not there was some exaggeration in that, but he said that they were very moved and upset about what they saw. What kind of reaction do you think he's getting at the Miami courthouse, Nicole?
Well, first of all, the process of getting him to the courthouse, I can tell you that you are dealing with the finest. You've got the U.S. Secret Service, you've got Miami-Dade Police Department, and you've got the city of Miami right there in the courthouse. You know, they are putting safety of preeminent importance, and they are the best. I have worked alongside these officers over and over, and they are outstanding. As far as the reaction of those that are, you know, tasked with processing him, I cannot speak to that. As a federal agent, you are a true professional, right? Mm-hmm. You took an oath to uphold the Constitution, and it is your job to do that. But, you know, from what I understand what you're saying, it might touch people's hearts in a certain way depending on how they feel. But it is so important as an agent that you keep your political opinions outside of your job. And that is very, very important, not just for processing someone, but for conducting all sorts of investigations. Mm-hmm. You cannot allow your personal views to get in the way of you doing your job.
Well, I think that's good advice in a lot of professions, and probably needs to be taken more seriously, including in the media and many parts of American society. Juan, let me bring you in on that note, because we've heard all kinds of reaction to this document, to the charges that are in it. And yet this is the very beginning of the American legal process. This is what he is accused of. We have not heard from his team yet, and we know he's still assembling his team. But what would you say in terms of the caution that's required in waiting until all sides are heard? Because ever since Donald Trump came on the scene, there's been a ton of jumping to conclusions.
I think that's a fair comment, Martha. And I think, you know, one of the things that Jack Smith said in his statement last week was that we all have to presume that Donald Trump is innocent, that his innocence is to be treated as we would treat anybody who was accused of a crime but had not been before a judge, had not been before a jury, had the opportunity to defend himself. And I think that's what, you know, we've been talking about this as a historic moment, the first time a former president is facing federal charges. But I think it's also historic in the sense of reminding all of us that, you know, in this country, we're a nation of laws. Nobody's above the law. And in part of that law is that you have the opportunity to make your case that you are not guilty, that the state does not have power to put you in jail or punish you if you are innocent of the charges in the minds of your peers, and that would be 12 people. Obviously, there were peers on the grand jury who went ahead with the indictment, but ultimately, the grand jury heard from the prosecutors. They did not hear from Donald Trump.
That's right. And it's a very a much lower bar, obviously, for a grand jury to say that they vote in favor of moving forward with the American judicial process, and then both sides will be heard. You know, I'm thinking about what Jack Smith said, Andy McCarthy, about how no one is above the law, right? And one of the problems with where we've been over the past several years is that I think Americans across the country have sort of said, this is what I believe based on what I've learned. And I don't necessarily believe that these entities and agencies that we have all trusted as a country are that trustworthy in all cases anymore. We just, introduced Nicole, who left her job at the FBI because she ran up against a lot of political weaponization. So is Jack Smith right when he says that nobody is above the law?
Well, he's right in principle. I don't know that he's right down here on planet Earth, but it'll be interesting to measure what he said. I think, Martha, he really put a marker down with that, and I would combine that with the way he has laid out in detail the different classified documents that they are attributing to former President Trump. The reason I was so surprised about that is that normally in a national security case, the government would say, it would be too harmful to have this information out in the public domain, and they try to have as much of a clamp on it as they can. In this instance, he put it out there, and he put it out there under circumstances where the very first thing that he told the public in his press conference, as you mentioned, is this idea of one standard of justice. Well, now you have simultaneously a situation where President Biden is also under investigation by a special counsel for mishandling classified information. And I'm just wondering if there's one standard of justice, now that we've gotten an indictment and we've got an itemized list of all these different classified documents that they took from former President Trump, where they gave you the gist of what the document was about, they gave you the classification level, and they put in there what the duration of his illegal possession of them was. Is there any good reason, I can't think of one, why we shouldn't get a similar itemized list to show that there's only one standard of justice? A similar itemized list showing every document. Well, obviously, they're not going to tell us everything that's in it, but the kind of information they gave about Trump, I think they ought to give about Biden. Give us an itemized list, tell us the classification levels, and tell us how long he possessed them.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, Andy. And, when we see in the images in this indictment, walls full of boxes, right? And stacks of boxes in a number of different places. But then there's a section in this indictment which enumerates the classified documents, which, you could fit into half a box. There are 71 of them that are either top secret or secret. That fall into that category. And there are others that are classified. But in terms of the number, and I don't know that the number it's not really the most important thing. The content of what was taken and who saw it and all of that is probably the most important thing. But there are 71 secret or top secret documents, and I don't think that's all that different than what we have learned in some of these other cases, whether it's Bill Clinton or Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you say that, because the hardest thing about this case legally is the political context that it comes up in. And inevitably, especially with President Trump talking about this every single day, which he will be from here on out, you're going to be hearing a lot about the details of the Hillary Clinton case that was not prosecuted, and the details of what we know so far with respect to President Biden's possession of these documents. And this is all happening. It's not just one case. It's 4 different cases that are happening in this political context. I was thinking, as Nicole was giving the checklist of things that are happening today and will be happening going forward, in my mind, I'm trying to do the math to multiply this by 3 or 4, depending on how many other cases there are. And, Martha, you and Juan and Mark follow this part of it a lot more closely than I do. But I'm just wondering, given the way this is going to play out, where something is going to be happening every week with respect to these prosecutions involving President Trump, how did the people who were running against Trump get traction for their campaigns?
Yeah,
because it seems to me every week they're going to be asked about this.
Yep, and it's a really sticky wicket. It's a tough thing for them to figure out which way they should go if they're the person who is hoping to knock him out of first place. Let's bring in Mark Thiessen, American Enterprise Institute Senior Fellow and Fox News contributor. Mark, we've seen a little bit of this, right? We saw Nikki Haley was on this program yesterday, and after coming out initially and saying that prosecutorial overreach was something that really bothers Americans, she cited it as reckless behavior on the part of the president. And she also talked about the fact that she is a military spouse. She said, my husband is about to redeploy, and these secrets are not to be messed with. So how do these individuals navigate this political minefield?
Well, they're struggling with the same thing that most Americans are struggling with, which is that two things can be true at the same time. They can be true that Donald Trump's handling of classified information was egregious, outrageous, and possibly criminal, and that he's the victim of selective prosecution by a politicized Justice Department that's been out to get him since day one. Those two things can both be true at the same time. And so, you know, these are things that we're navigating and the presidential candidates are navigating. But there's an interesting point also that we need to consider as this plays out politically, which is, you know, and Andy McCarthy, my friend, has laid out very clearly why this is a very, very damning indictment. Jonathan Turley said, you know, he's got to run the table and beat all 37 counts, or he's going to have a terminal sentence and end his life in jail. He also only has to convince one juror that he's not guilty, and he's acquitted. Imagine what would happen if Donald Trump was acquitted of this, especially the trial probably happens right before the conventions. If you look back at how his poll numbers went up with the American people after the Mueller probe, when Mueller came out and basically cleared him of Russia collusion, then they had the first impeachment, and before COVID, everybody thought he was a shoo-in for re-election. Can you imagine the bump that he would get, not just with Republicans, but with the public in general, if he were acquitted of these charges, if he were found not guilty? It would mean that the Biden Justice Department probably elected Donald Trump to his second term as president.
Yeah, and then, you know, you have the Durham report, which said that the FBI went off and running on Crossfire Hurricane on a case that was unsubstantiated based on the evidence that they had. And that not only that, then they started to go after FISA approval to spy on members of the Trump campaign and, you know, continue to pursue it, even though they didn't have the foundation to open an investigation, which I think is pretty stunning. You know, we've heard similar things on the opposite side of that equation, and then the investigation just dies, just goes away. But not in that case, okay? So think about that. Let's bring in Bret Baier, who's also with us this afternoon as we follow the live coverage. Bret, the president has pled not guilty. This is the second of the cases that he faces. We've been talking about this. There's also the January 6th case, which falls under Jack Smith's purview as well as special counsel, and then the Georgia election case. How do voters absorb all of this, as Mark says, on what will be a weekly basis?
Yeah, Martha, good afternoon. I think it's overwhelming, the amount of not only the cases, but the coverage of the cases, and we've seen it today, and we're not alone in this coverage throughout the day. So it is definitely going to be in the political bloodstream for some time, and we don't know how long this is going to go. The federal cases, we're told, take precedence, and so you have New York Attorney General Letitia James and Alvin Bragg up there, the district. You're going to have the U.S. Attorney Alvin Bragg, rather, the Manhattan District Attorney, saying that they're going to be back on the back burner as the federal cases move forward, and particularly this one first. And I think you're going to see, you know, the former president tap into this void where there isn't action legally. A lot of pretrial motions that'll happen in his defense. There are all kinds of things that'll go on, and Jonathan Turley and others can list them, but challenging the search warrant, challenging the interview of his attorney, and attorney-client privilege. There are a lot of things that will be challenged prior to getting to a trial.
Yeah, absolutely. Evan Corcoran, his attorney, is one of the sources in this indictment, and they did require and receive the right to talk to him. But we know that that's going to be one of the things that the Trump folks are going to argue that that was a breach of attorney-client privilege. And it's a sort of situation where everything around the charges are the issues that the Trump team is likely to press on. It's an election year. We're in the middle of, the potential prosecution of the lead candidate during that election year. But it's interesting, Brett, when we look at some of the numbers and the support, right, 81% of GOP voters say they think this is a political prosecution. And you look at the crowd out there, 49% of all voters say, yeah, there's probably some political tinge to this. And I wonder, even though it's historic and unprecedented what we're watching today, even people who follow this closely, I think, many of them haven't read this document.
Which is why the special counsel, Jack Smith, came out in that short announcement during your show last week and said, in that talking to the press, read the indictment. Read the indictment, and we are going to move forward with a speedy process, and it lays it all out. Not many people obviously read the indictment, but what's in there for the legal experts who side with the special counsel is very troubling, and you have some politicians talking about that. On the flip side, you had Senator Marco Rubio earlier today laying out a very articulate case of why the Justice Department and the special counsel should not have made this jump and how bad it is for the country at this moment in time. And we're going to be playing out those arguments for days and weeks to come.
Indeed, we will. Brett, thanks for being with us. Stand by if you would. One of former President Trump's rivals in the 2024 race defended him today on the steps of that courthouse that you see in Miami, Vivek Ramaswamy, saying that the indictment reeks of politics and demanding answers from the Justice Department about any communication between the President Biden, his Attorney General, Merrick Garland, and the special counsel. Watch this moment from earlier. Okay, we'll get to that in just a moment. Republican presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy joins me now. Vivek, good to have you with us today. Thank you very much.
Good to see you.
You're moving around quickly today. You were down in Miami at the courthouse, and we have you here this afternoon, so thank you very much for... All right, let's listen to you earlier today. Watch this.
What did Biden tell Jack Smith? What did Biden tell Merrick Garland? What did Merrick Garland tell Special Prosecutor Jack Smith?
So that's an important question. The president has said, we have nothing to do with this. They're doing your thing. What exactly are you looking for, hoping for, and do you think you're going to get it?
I certainly expect to. The law requires these government agencies, including the DOJ, to comply with the Freedom of Information Act request. And I want to be really clear. It would be easier for me if President Trump were eliminated from competition in this race. But I wanted to stand on the side of principle to do what so many in the mainstream news media refuse to do, which is to actually be skeptical, get to the bottom of what's behind what I see as a politicized indictment. And the thing that made me actually take that step is that I did read that indictment, actually. And, I bring my legally trained eyes to this as well. There were a lot of selective omissions of both fact and law from that indictment. Not one mention of the Presidential Records Act. Not one mention of the 2012 case, the leading federal case that interpreted the Presidential Records Act in the context of the Clinton sock drawer case. Selective quotes from Trump on the 2016 campaign trail without once mentioning, actually, after the 2016 election, his commitment not to pursue Hillary. Executive orders not binding on a president. That's how the classification scheme is actually set. So the fact that Jack Smith knows this, he's a smart man, I'm sure. And that didn't show up in the indictment, to me, does reek of politicization. And so that's why I'm suspicious that I don't believe nearly everything that's in the indictment, nor everything we're hearing from the White House. And I want to use FOIA, using my campaign to do it at our expense, filed a FOIA request to get to the bottom of what Biden told Garland and what Garland told Jack Smith.
So you want to see email communications, phone calls between the two. Obviously, President Biden is at the top of the executive branch, so the DOJ does fall under his purview. Do you not believe him when he says that he's been completely hands-off in this? You don't believe him?
I am deeply suspicious. The way that this administration has functioned, I believe the White House has a heavy hand in guiding the direction of the Department of Justice. I think the use of an independent prosecutor here is a bit of a smokescreen. And I believe in holding all parties accountable. Let's get the transparency, get it on the table. The public deserves to know what role the political actors played in what they're disguising as a depoliticized prosecution. especially in the context of a history-breaking event like this one, the first ever former president indicted, setting a dangerous precedent of a political rival of a sitting president being indicted. I think that demands the maximal extent of transparency. I don't think we're getting that. I think Jack Smith owes answers on why there was selective omissions of fact and law in that indictment. This is not the standard to use when you're actually setting history, I think, in a bad way for this country. And I also believe in hearing from the Republican candidates and the other Democratic contenders, including RFK and Marianne Williamson, on where they stand on this. I was public today at that courthouse that I would pardon President Trump on January 20th, 2025, based on what I see in that indictment, based on the bad precedent that this sets for the country. We need to unite the country. And this is not a Democrat or Republican issue. But just like I don't think Biden should hide, I don't think the other GOP or Democratic candidates should hide from this either. It's one of the things the U.S. president is empowered to do by the Constitution, to pardon federal offenses. I've been clear about where I stand. And I think that can actually be unifying for the country when competitors like me to Trump, and I would have done things very differently from Trump, by the way, but there's a difference between a bad judgment and actually breaking the law. When us as competitors come out and say we'll pardon him, especially if Democrats did the same thing, I think that could actually take a meaningful leap towards unifying the country.
Have you had response from any of your fellow GOP candidates for the nomination as to whether or not they would also agree to pardon the former president?
It's only been a few hours, so I'd like to give them time. I expect responses from them in the next 48 hours. And I think that if they don't want to agree to me, that's fine, but they deserve to be transparent about why. We cannot hide under the rug. This is a major issue in the country right now. The use of federal police to arrest a lead opponent of the White House, of the president in power, that's a big deal. And I think if we're in the middle of an election, the voters in the primary base in the Republican Party deserve to know where each of us as candidates stand. If you disagree with me, that's fine, but let's at least be open about it. I think we need more transparency in both parties.
I know members of Congress are calling for this as well, but it comes to mind when you're talking about the transparency that you'd like to see in terms of this process. Why don't we know more about the work of Special Counsel Hur, who is investigating the Biden classified documents? And we all remember the picture of, the documents in the box behind the Corvette in the garage, and that others were found at the Penn Center. We know that some of these, according to reports, were from his Senate days. When you boil it down, which we just did, in terms of the Trump documents, there are 71 documents that are secret or top secret, according to the indictment. That's what they said, that fall into those two highest categories. Can we get a sense from Mr. Hur in terms of where this all is and how many documents, top secret and secret, we're dealing with on that side?
It's a great point. And when it comes to corruption in the federal government, on both sides, sunlight is going to be the best disinfectant. It's part of why I'm in this race. I do think it's going to take an outsider that doesn't just take that status quo in Washington, what I think is a big overclassification problem we have, by the way, in the police state and the national security establishment. But even more broadly, transparency into the administrative state. I think that's something the Democrats and Republicans alike should want to rally behind.
And it should scare a lot of people because it should be something that's demanded.
Yes.
And you really can't get away with political prosecutions in this country. It deeply undermines the nation, and it really disturbs voters. And it's one of the things that makes me wonder if there isn't a pox on all the houses. Is that something that you're hoping, that people want another alternative, that they want to shake it up this time around? Do you think all of this, even given what you say about it, gives you an avenue to say, you know what, let's move on?
Let's put this to one side. I do think there's a hunger in our base for an outsider, somebody who's not captive to that system. And I am in this race to run to something. I think too long as a movement we've been running from something. What are we running to? And in order to move forward, I think we have to put aside retrospective grievances across the board. Everyone needs to lay down their swords, Democrats, Republicans, to say that we're not a country where one party weaponizes the Justice Department against another. We're a country where we, the people, get to decide who governs this country, where every person's voice and vote counts equally. That's not a Democrat idea. That's not a Republican idea. That's a 1776 ideal. And I think we're in a moment where people are hungry for reviving that. That's why I'm in this race.
So, and what's your reaction to the fact that the president is ahead by 38 points over his closest competitor, Ron DeSantis, at this point? These things don't seem to hurt him at all, numbers-wise. If anything, they may be helping him.
Look, I could care less for the politics of it, to be honest. You're right. The numbers would suggest.
But you want to win.
Absolutely. For the near-term numbers of it. Before the first debate, none of this matters. If you look at actually where Trump was in June of 2015, that's about exactly where I am today. I think the debate stage is going to be critical in this election. I think that's going to force the other Republican candidates to actually come out and say, this is what we stand for and why we stand for it. And if we disagree, let's have it in the open so that we can actually define our agenda. My strategy in this race is that we want to be leading the way in defining the agenda. And my prediction is that that's exactly what the voters are going to reward next year. Following a very similar track as an outsider as Trump did in 2015, it's actually my prediction. I think it's going to become a tradition in the GOP, the norm in our party, that we put up, when it comes to the White House, we actually put up the outsider. When you're talking about bringing transparency and accountability to the administrative state, now even the police aspects of the administrative state, I think that job does take an outsider. I think you get to be an outsider once, and I'm the outsider in this race.
Before I let you go, what are the chances that Donald Trump is not the nominee in your mind right now?
I'm in this race because I believe I'll be the nominee, to be really honest with you. But I want to build on the foundation that he laid. I think he rolled a log over, showing a lot of the administrative state's corruption. Problem is, if you roll that log over and see what crawls out, you better bring the pesticide. So I'm learning from 8 years of watching, the last 8 years, including his 4 years in office, to say we're going to build on that foundation. He identified the problem, but I'm here to lead the country forward to actually solve them and revive, really, America first to the next level. That's what I think it means to actually put America first. Let's rediscover what America is. That's what I'm in this race to do.
Vivek Ramaswamy, a candidate for the GOP nomination, joining us here on The Story Live, and he was in Miami this morning. He says that the president, the former president, if found guilty, should be pardoned and would be pardoned under a Ramaswamy administration, and urges others to do the same. Thank you very much. Great to have you. Hope you'll come back soon.
It's good to see you.
Thank you. All right, so joining us again from Special Report is anchor Brett Baer. Brett, good to have you back with us. We're waiting for the former president to emerge from this courtroom. Tonight, he will go to the Bedminster Golf Club where he spends the summer, and he's going to address the crowd. You know, last time around, there were suggestions about not talking about the case. We don't know yet whether or not this judge is going to give him the same kind of guidance about what he can and cannot say. Do you think he'll listen to it either way?
I mean, we're getting some indication that the judge is saying that he's going to be released from the courtroom without any conditions, and the judge does not see him as a flight risk, obviously. He is also, he was booked there in the federal courtroom, and just that moment alone is quite something. A former president for the first time being booked in federal court, and he was the chief executive over that federal government at one time not too long ago. So he will go from here to Bedminster. We don't expect they're going to have any comments right after this. And we do think that he is going to make a speech at the club, at the golf club.
So just getting a little bit of what happened in there, we're told that the former president was quiet, stoic, was whispering a bit with his attorneys, and discussing some of this that was not heard over a mic while they were in there. The attorney, Todd Blanche, obviously at his side. He's from New York. He was asked by the judge if he would be in Florida permanently for this trial, and he responded that yes, he would be there for the trial and for any appearances, Brett. And Walt Nauta, who was the former president's body man, who is very prominent in this indictment, and without whom there would be no conspiracy. He's the other side of the conspiracy charge, that together they moved boxes and tried to evade them from NARA and Department of Justice collections. So this is a tough day for Walt Nauta as well, Brett.
Yeah, and it faces serious charges, and obviously is being loyal to the former president. I think we're going to see this play out, and just politically, as you're talking to Vivek Ramaswamy, he is making this an issue about the possible pardon. I think that this issue, this whole day, and these charges are going to be a major issue in the presidential race that every candidate is going to have to deal with. And as you've seen, there has been some evolution in how some have talked about it. Some saying strictly that there are two tiers of justice and focusing on the Hillary Clinton case and the Joe Biden case and the Hunter Biden case. Others now, like Vice President Pence and Nikki Haley, saying there are very serious charges in here, and we have to hear what the defense is going to be. So it'll be a big part of this election, no matter what comes out of the legalities going forward.
Yeah. Let's bring in our panel. Thank you, Brett. Stand by. Andy McCarthy, former federal prosecutor, Fox News contributor. Nicole Parker, former FBI special agent for over 12 years. She left the Bureau. She said that it became politically weaponized, and as much as she loved her work there, she couldn't do it any longer in that environment. Walt Williams, Fox News senior political analyst. Good to have all of you with us, and Mark Thiessen's going to join us in a moment at the desk here as well. You know, in terms of these other cases, Juan, I'm sure you heard the news from Senator Grassley last night that he says that something was withheld from the document that was given to the Oversight Committee with regard to this question of the Biden family and their dealings in Ukraine. And that the Burisma executive says that he has 17 tapes that he kept for some kind of insurance after his conversations with then Vice President Biden and then Hunter Biden as well. What is your reaction to that? And what do you want to know in terms of how we're getting to the bottom of that investigation?
Well, I mean, to me, what I see is that there's a tremendous attempt by people who are now aligning themselves with President Trump to throw up smoke and mirrors and conspiracy theories, and let's go back to cases that were previously investigated. In the case of this one, a case that was investigated under the Trump administration by Attorney General Barr, and they did not authorize further investigation at that time. Last week, Senator Grassley said he's less interested in the allegations than he is having the FBI do their job. He wants to make sure that they are being aggressive in handling the Hunter Biden case. Okay, but that's not something that's substantive. At this point, we don't know. Nothing has come out that indicates that there was any...
Because there's no... There is absolutely...
Because they just saw the document...
Juan, there's no... Who can honestly say that they feel confident that that investigation really even happened, that they dug into these things, when we're now learning that redacted in the document, they talk about 17 tapes. Where are the tapes? Wouldn't you like to hear them? I'd like to hear them.
Martha, you're going backwards in times. Again, the Trump administration was there. Bill Barr, the Attorney General, was there. They were very interested in this case. They were going overseas to look for leads in this case, and they didn't do it. So, I mean, I just think there's no need to go backwards unless you're trying to distract from what we're seeing today. I mean, I hear people say, oh, what about Hillary Clinton? Well, I mean, what about Joe Biden? What about those files in Joe Biden's garage? Look, Joe Biden's team made those documents known to the government. The government didn't go to Biden. And in case of Hillary Clinton, there was no effort to obstruct or lie about her activities. I mean, you know, this is a clear difference with this case involving
the
Trump.
servers were smashed and the emails were destroyed, Juan. The question, but you know, here's the problem.
No, the emails were destroyed under the rules of law, Martha. Under the rules of law, the person who's being investigated has the right to look at her emails or his emails and decide which ones are relevant for the government to scrutinize. And now all of a sudden, Trump brings this up because, again, it's smoke and mirrors and say, oh, it's unfair. What's unfair here, I don't know, because that case that's been laid out by Jack Smith, it seems to me, is so strong that you don't hear even Trump supporters trying to make the case that it's weak.
Well, I don't know how strong it is.
Instead, they're going off after Hillary.
We've only heard one side of this case, right? And yes, there are I've read this several times, this indictment, and there are things in here that are disturbing, as we have said over and over on this show with many guests, okay? There are also things in these other cases that are disturbing, and you seem to be able to just say, oh, everybody did what they were supposed to do there. But the problem is that half the country sees investigations as either politically sunk or politically elevated, depending on the winds that happen to be backing them. So you may have confidence that those cases were investigated clearly. A lot of Americans don't have that confidence. They see, my goodness, so how could it take 5 years to investigate Hunter Biden's taxes and what's on a laptop? Can you explain that to me? What is taking 5 years, Juan, if it isn't backburnered?
If it isn't backburnered, maybe they're having trouble finding evidence that would say to them that a drug-addicted, sex-addled kid President Biden's son, no, we can make a case and feel confident in making this case that it wouldn't be viewed as political and that a jury would convict this really, lost child of a crime here, that it wouldn't be seen as we were just going after him because he's the president's son.
Yeah, don't make him sound like the victim.
Look at who the prosecutor there is, Martha. This is a point I was making to you earlier. Think about it. Who's the prosecutor in Delaware? It's a Trump-appointed prosecutor. Who was the prosecutor when we were looking into all of this stuff? Again, Bill Barr, the Trump administration.
Look, if there's nothing there, then the case should be closed.
I mean, what is to say?
Yeah, it's still open. So that's the question. And I think a lot of people believe that it's still open because it's the president's son of an active president. Now you've got an active political campaign going on, a former president. Somehow we're going to be super expeditious and everything's going to wrap up. We're going to do a speedy trial on this one. All I'm saying is that these things raise a lot of questions in the minds of Americans, Juan. And I think we all have to have our eyes open about what's going on here. The question isn't that he was drug-addled. The question is that while he was drug-addled, he was dealing with Ukrainian businessmen and Chinese businessmen and making millions of dollars from them while those two countries were under his father, the vice president's purview. So if you don't think that that just raises enough questions to do a very open investigation to make sure that everything has been checked out, then I think maybe you don't want to see what's back there either. I don't know.
Martha, I agree with you. I think if you've got proof, show it to me. But nepotism and being the son of a famous man, my goodness, I can tell you about sons of famous men, son-in-laws in the case of Trump, who have greatly benefited, financially benefited. But that's not, nepotism is not a crime.
No, we're talking about a bribery that may have taken place between an executive in the Ukraine in order to have an outcome in U.S. policy. That's what we're talking about. So all of those other things, we're talking about something very...
Nobody has offered any proof.
Okay. All right. The investigation goes on, and it'll probably, I don't know how many more years it's going to go on for, but boy, they must be doing an awesome job because they've been at it for 5 years in this thing. And they haven't closed it, and they haven't moved on. So they're still in it for 5 years. Juan, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I want to bring in our next guest as we talk about this potential bribery scheme that has been suggested by these documents regarding the president when he was vice president. Let's bring in Republican Senator Marsha Blackburn. She's on the Judiciary Committee, and we heard from Senator Grassley, Senator Blackburn, last night, who I think shocked a lot of people when he got in front of the microphone and he said, what was redacted from what you saw is that there are recordings that the Burisma, potentially the head of Burisma, was keeping as some sort of insurance policy on the money that he gave to Hunter Biden and Joe Biden. This is what is suggested in Grassley's comments last night. Tell me your take on this, Senator.
My take on this is that the FBI made a conscious choice to redact the fact that there are 17 recordings that are held by this executive. Now, what we don't know, Martha, is their full reasoning for this. And we got into this during my questioning of the Deputy FBI Director today in committee. He admitted that, yes, they did the redactions. So we'll drill down on this a little bit further. Did they do it to shield the Bidens? Did they do it to protect the source? Did they not want the rest of the committee to know that the recordings existed? Is this someone they have worked with in the past in getting this information? So our hearing today and our questioning of Mr. Abate, who's the deputy director at the FBI, really opens more questions as to why the FBI is choosing to exercise 2 tiers of justice, and the American people see this. Tennesseans see this every day, and they cannot figure out why the FBI will just not do their job. I asked him today, I said, tell me what your job is. You say you get up and you do a great job every day. You do your best to do your job. Is your job to protect the United States and the Constitution, or is it to protect Joe Biden? Because they have spent a lot of years providing cover for and not getting answers to what the Bidens have been up to. And you have all these banking records, you have these accusations. If the Bidens wanted to clear this up, looks like they would get out here and come clean on all of this. But that is not a choice that is being made. You get more deflecting, distracting, two tiers of justice, and people are sick of this. They saw it with Hillary Clinton using bleach bit. If you weren't afraid of what was in your emails, why would you use bleach bit? And you saw it with her hammering iPhones. If you weren't afraid of the SIM cards, why were you out here hammering iPhones? Why are they choosing to let the Clintons and the Bidens and others go, but going after Donald Trump nonstop? And people are wanting answers to this.
Yeah. As we said, that case is open.
Yes,
we want to learn
it is.
more about these tapes and whose hands they're in. I got to go, but Senator Blackburn, did you ask the Department of Justice if they have possession of these tapes, or they just heard about them through the informant?
Senator Cruz, who went before me, had asked if they were in possession. They did not answer.
Okay. Senator Blackburn, always good to have you with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So joining us once again, Andy McCarthy, former federal prosecutor and Fox News contributor, and Nicole Parker, former FBI special agent for over 12 years in the Miami Bureau. Welcome back to both of you. Here's a little bit more of what we're learning has happened inside the court. It reads that Trump's bond order had a special condition which states that there be a no contact order for Trump and any witnesses in this case. Todd Blanche objected to this, saying that it's basically impossible given Trump's close contact with so many witnesses, some being employees, et cetera. After some back and forth, the judge agreed to have it state, quote, no communication about this case among Trump and any witnesses. Trump signed and dated the bond order at 3:27 p.m. this afternoon. Andy, your thoughts on that, and then from Nicole.
Yeah, I really think that's it's unfortunate that that came up that way, because the suggestion, of course, is that he would intimidate or influence the witnesses. You know, first of all, if that ever happened, Martha, in a trial, you get to ask the witnesses, have you had conversations with this guy? It can be very damaging evidence. But if they had evidence that they believe there's reason to believe he would intimidate these witnesses, they should have put that out there and explained it. I don't think that should be a standard part of a bail order.
Interesting. Nicole, you're familiar with this Judge Goodman, who is presiding over this afternoon. What do you think about that?
You know, Judge Goodman, he's a great man. He's fair, and you know, it is what it is. But I'd like to comment real quickly about what some of your previous guests have said. As a former FBI agent, and I am in close contact with many retired agents, I can tell you that the general consensus among many is that the FBI is politicized. And they do not, as agents, we do not always see equal enforcement of the law, and that is not appropriate. You must put your political opinions aside and be fair, and you know, it's unacceptable. Anything less than that is unacceptable. And it does matter what's happened in the past. It absolutely does matter, because that Americans see that. They see this constant pattern of only going after one side of the political spectrum. And that is not, it's just not acceptable. And for them to say, you know, no one is above the law, that is correct. No one is above the law. So we should expect, you know, this FD 1023, that came out because of a whistleblower. If there are 17 tapes, let's see if those actually exist, and let's see what the FBI does. You know, all of these cases were over and over. It seems that, you know, they slow walk people that are on one side of the political spectrum, but aggressively go after those on the other side. It is unacceptable, and it, you know, it threatens our democracy, because Americans no longer trust the FBI. They don't even care to read this indictment that's come out, because they've already made up their mind. They're like, you know what, the FBI is political, and I don't even care to read the indictment. That undermines the law enforcement and justice system of this country.
Yeah,
and so it does matter.
It's a very sad state of affairs. And, you know, I want to make clear, Andy, that, we're, you know, in pointing out these other cases, you're not suggesting, in our conversation, we're not suggesting that what's in this indictment isn't a serious potential offense. We're just saying that we're in the beginning of the process. We haven't heard from the other side yet, but that these things, for these things to be treated equally. I mean, it feels like the American public just really need to have people in charge who they can look to and see examples of their fairness, of the way that they treat both sides in order to restore some sort of confidence in the system, Andy.
Yeah, well, when I hear this, what about, Martha, you know, in the law, that's what the law is. Whataboutism is what the law is. We decide things based on precedent. We make laws, we make statutory law based on our experience. We gauge whether people are being treated fairly in a due process sense by comparing how they've been treated to how other people who've done analogous things have been treated. That's not whataboutism like it's a political hit point. That's what we do in the law. That's what it's about. And you know, listening to your conversation about the Hunter Biden situation, one thing occurred to me. Everybody should have in mind October of 2023. Hunter Biden made a false statement in a federal gun form in October of 2018. You want to talk about like all these other cases, it would take a competent prosecutor and agent about 5 days, not 5 years, 5 days to put that case together. Yeah. They have had it for 5 years. The statute of limitations runs in October.
As Bill Barr said the other day, this is a simple case, the Trump case. You know, it seems like the other one should have been done in 5 weeks, as you say. I just want to mention that the president, as of a few minutes ago, left the courtroom. The motorcade is leaving the courthouse in about 3 minutes. That should be right about now. And it will arrive in about 15 minutes as they head to the airport. So we're going to keep a close eye on the movement here on the ground. It looks like we're about to see the reverse of what we saw on the way out of the Doral Country Club and Resort. And we're seeing the assembly of a lot of Miami-Dade police officers who are on motorcycle. We saw an enormous motorcade that brought the former president to this courthouse, and we expect that we're going to see some movement here very soon, and we'll see if maybe there's a potential to have any sort of reaction or a glimpse of the former president as he leaves this this really dramatic afternoon for him. Let me bring back in Mark Thiessen, American Enterprise Institute senior fellow and Fox News contributor. You've been around a lot of presidents, Mark. Yep. It's almost unfathomable the amount of pressure that this man has been under since he came down that escalator, right? Yeah. And I think at that point, you know, he was a celebrity. He was, you know, may have felt like, look, I'm just going to be embraced. This is going to be great. I know I do make some positive changes in the country. And the next most egregious error that he made was winning the 2016 election, because from that moment on, he has been under complete attack. Now, that's not to say that some of these attacks have not been earned. Yep. Through behavior that, as Vivek Ramaswamy said, you know, he said he would have handled things very differently. But the constant attack is absolutely undeniable. How does he do it?
I don't know. And I don't know how our country does it. I mean, think about this. This is not just the first former president ever indicted, but this is the first time in American history that the administration of the incumbent president is prosecuting the leading presidential candidate of the opposition party who's going to challenge him in the November elections. I mean, that is just the tipping point for our democracy, and the stakes for our democracy are so high. This has to be so credible, so above board, so unquestionable if you're going to make that decision. And half the country thinks this is political, and another 16% isn't sure. So, I mean, 65% of the country either thinks it's a political prosecution or is not really sure what to think. That is not a good situation for our country to be in. And then you look, you know, you were talking about how you'd read the indictment. I read the indictment too. If you read the first dozen pages of this indictment, almost everything in there could be applied to Joe Biden. I mean, just let me give you a couple examples. Trump was not authorized to possess or retain those classified documents. Biden was not authorized to have the ones that he had at the Penn Biden Center or his home. The Mar-a-Lago Club was not an authorized location for storage, possession, review, or discussion of classified documents. Neither was the Penn Biden Center or Joe Biden's garage. The Mar-a-Lago Club hosted more than 150 social events. Well, the Penn Biden Center, they had classes with international students, and they had a joint program with the Japanese government where they had foreign nationals. There was Antony Blinken's office where he was greeting foreign visitors all the time. That was dangerous. Trump caused his boxes containing hundreds of classified documents to be transported from the White House to the Mar-a-Lago Club. Joe Biden caused documents to be transported to his home and to the Penn Biden Center. It goes on and on. Now, what they're saying that they're charging him with the willful retention of classified documents.
Well, they're saying for 18 months he resisted their requests. They said, look, we're coming down, we're coming down, we're coming down. And they kept, they say, moving the boxes around. And that's how they got to the raid.
All true. And that's, as you say, that's where, if he had just given back the documents, none of this would be happening. But the Espionage Act doesn't require willful retention. The standard in this, I'm going to read you the Espionage Act, through gross negligence permits defense information to be removed from a proper place of custody a person who does that shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 10 years. The standard in the law is gross negligence. They can make the reason they've chosen willfulness is because they want to distinguish it from Joe Biden, but that's a political decision. That is not a legal decision. The standard in the law is gross negligence. Jim Comey came up with this fiction that you had to have intent in order to excuse not prosecuting Hillary Clinton. And so now they're going with the fiction that Jim Comey came in to go after Trump and say intent. But you don't have to have intent. It's gross negligence. And by the way, intent, smashing cell phones, erasing 30,000 emails. So a lot of Americans have questions about this, and they're right to have them.
We're seeing the president's motorcade start to pull out here, and we'll keep on this live shot. You see a lot of people gathered along the sides of the street, enormous police presence and Secret Service surrounding the former president as he leaves the courthouse here. Let's bring... All right, Mark Meredith is on the scene. Let's go to Mark with his take from where he is. Mark.
Martha, good afternoon. Just an update to this story. We just got done speaking with our Fox representative who was in the courtroom, and he tells us that the former president did not say anything during this arraignment hearing, instead allowing his legal team to speak on his behalf, saying those words, not guilty. We also know that Mr. Trump is going to be released on his own recognizance. He didn't have to surrender his passport. Of course, a bit different than you'd see in a traditional criminal setting. This already is kind of what we expected, given what we saw in New York earlier this year. We had kind of an idea of what to expect, but also had a chance to speak with our producer, who told me that the former president never made any eye contact with the special counsel, Jack Smith, the person who is bringing these charges on behalf of the Justice Department. We were curious of whether or not we'd see any sort of, stand down behavior between the two men, and it appears that they did not interact at all. Trump, however, again, choosing to stay very quiet and allowing his lawyers to speak on his behalf. It's also understanding that Walt Nauta, the aide that was also charged in relation to this case, did not have a formal arraignment. He is still seeking legal counsel at this point, someone to represent him down here in Florida, but that the same rules are likely to apply for him. It's the judge ordering today that Trump not discuss this case with those witnesses, people that may be influenced by the events that happened at Mar-a-Lago throughout 2022. Our producer, though, of course, still saying we're going to get some more information, and Martha, of course, will send it out once we have it.
Okay, Mark, thank you. Mark Meredith on the scene at the courthouse in Miami. The live aerial shot that you're watching right now is former President Donald Trump, the 45th president of the United States, as he leaves the courthouse. You heard the reporting from inside the courthouse that the former president was quiet as he watched all of this play out. We know that he entered a not guilty plea. You can see the backup of traffic as they clear the roads for him to make his way to the airport, where he will fly back to New Jersey, and where we understand he will make a statement tonight around 8:15 from the Bedminster Golf Club in New Jersey, which is his summer home in the state of New Jersey. With that, let's bring in the Miami mayor, Francis Suarez, who was also at the courthouse today. Mayor Suarez, thank you. Good to have you with us. Your thoughts on what you watched play out today?
Well, thank you for having me. Thankfully, there were no major incidents. As we said, we would be prepared to make sure that the former president could get in and out of the federal building safely. That appears to have happened. There were no arrests. I can report that. And, it seemed like sometimes the press wanted there to be something happen. They questioned our police department's tactics. We were working hand in hand with our Miami-Dade County officers who were present, obviously federal agents, because that is a federal building. And, all the protesters came, they expressed their constitutional right to express their feelings on this matter. And thankfully, it was done, peacefully. And I think that's what we expect of Miamians, of visitors. That's what we expect of Americans. It's a beautiful thing to see people express their constitutional rights and be able to do it in a peaceful manner without any major incidents. Unlike what I think it's felt like some people were hoping for when they kept questioning what our tactics were, which were obviously very well prepared. I want to thank our police department for doing an excellent job, and hopefully there will be no incidents as the day unfolds.
Yeah. I know that on a separate political note, Mayor, a lot of people have wondered whether or not you are going to be the third Miami politician to throw your hat in the ring for the presidential race. You've spent time in Iowa, you spent time in New Hampshire. Where are you on that decision at this point?
I'm going to be making a big speech on Thursday at the Reagan Library, Presidential Library of Ronald Reagan. So stay tuned to that. It will be at 6 p.m. California time, 9 p.m. Eastern time, and I want everybody to tune in to hear what America can be under the possibility of a future that they are not potentially envisioning right now.
All right, well, we'll see the speech on Thursday, and we'll be watching to see if there are 3 people running from the state of Florida in this presidential race. Always good to talk to you, Mayor. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon on what I know is a busy day for you. Thank you, sir. So that's the story on this afternoon as you watch former President Donald Trump heading to the airport after his second arraignment, this one for federal crimes in the courthouse in Miami. More coverage straight ahead.
All right, thank you, Martha. We are indeed following Donald Trump. He is done at a Miami federal court where the former president did say to a 37-count indictment against him that he was not guilty. To quote his attorney, Todd Blanche, "We most certainly enter a plea of not guilty." Now the former president is going to make his way to Miami International Airport, move to Bedminster, New Jersey, his home up north, where he is expected to have a fundraiser and will be making remarks, maybe an outright speech, on all of this later on. We're separately learning that the bond order that the president had to sign in order to leave the courthouse states that he have no contact with any witnesses in this case, including Walt Nauta, who was also indicted. He's the former body man for the former president, who was helping him move boxes around, and some say that he was this co-conspirator that hatched this plan to hide that from authorities. So much we don't know, this much we do. The former president went ahead and signed and dated that bond order about a half an hour ago. Let's get the latest from Mark Meredith, who is in Miami, and takes a look at what went down just a few minutes ago. Hey, Mark.
Neil, good afternoon to you. Like you said, a historic day, and of course these proceedings will continue long after this arraignment hearing wrapped up just within the last few minutes. As we have mentioned, the former president pleading not guilty to those 37 felonies he's now facing that the Justice Department under the special counsel has charged him with, alleging that he conspired to hide these classified documents as the government was seeking to return them back to their possession after he left office in January of 2021. The atmosphere inside the courtroom from those people who were inside tell us that it was fairly quiet, that Trump did not say anything to the judge, instead allowing his lawyers to speak on his behalf, entering the actual words of not guilty. We also know that his former military aide, who's also facing charges, was in the courtroom today but has yet to get counsel. So the formal arraignment for him was put off, I believe, until June 27th will be the next date for him. As for Trump, of course, this has been just a wild couple of months. And I say that because, of course, this all started back in last year when the FBI began its investigation into where they were trying to find the placement of these documents. The representatives from the former president have made it clear that they feel this is political persecution, that the government is simply choosing to single out Trump as opposed to others who may have, in their view, committed similar acts. We did hear from a spokesperson for Trump outside the courthouse not long ago. Here's what she had to say.
The decision to pursue charges against President Trump while turning a blind eye to others is emblematic of the corruption that we have here. We are at a turning point in our nation's history.
So what will happen next? Well, we know the former president, as you're seeing live on your screen right now, is getting away to beat the Miami traffic. He's got a motorcade to the international airport, and he'll be taking about the 2.5-hour flight up to New Jersey. He will be speaking tonight from his golf club, which, of course, there will be a lot of focus on what he has to say. But given what we've seen on social media already, it's very likely he's going to be repeating some of those same claims that he feels that this is just a continuation of an attack on him. Whether or not this is going to have any major impact on his presidential campaign, that is still yet to be seen. seen, Neil, we've heard from some of the candidates that have had to weigh in whether or not they would pardon Trump if they were sent to the White House, if he were to be convicted on these felonies. We'll be looking to see, of course, when another court date may be set. All of this still in flux. And I know you'd be interested in this as well, Neil, is that while Trump, of course, is a criminal defendant, he did not have to surrender his passport. He did not have to have a mugshot taken. He was electronically fingerprinted. But again, there were not some of the same parameters that we see with other, criminal defendants in this case. We'll be looking to see if he beefs up his legal team. He got rid of some of his lawyers just a few days ago, people that had been with him for the last several months. So certainly an indication the strategy here continues to adjust. And Neil will be looking to see what the former president has to say just about 4 hours from now. Neil?
Another gem that comes with the job that he used to have is that they cleared traffic for him to get out of town. If you and I were in that, of course, we'd be waiting and waiting and waiting. But more, one of the other things that interested me, and he said that he didn't have his passport taken. Well, prosecutors themselves apparently told the judge that they did not consider the former president to be a flight risk. So you always, worry about the possibility, could the former president of the United States, be put in a jail cell to wait this out? That was never entertained, and the prosecutors themselves seemed to give latitude that wasn't even necessary, right?
No, but they also did set conditions. I think this is kind of interesting, Neil, that because there are going to be so many people in Trump's inner circle, that have connections to this case, there is going to be the people that the judge will say he cannot talk to about the case, and there will be others that the communication can continue with, but obviously not about this case specifically. So there is going to be other parameters set up at a later time. You're right, though, of course. This is so different than what anybody else we're facing. You and I would not get a motorcade to take us to an airport, even on a good day, let alone on a day we'd be facing criminal charges. Neil?
Well, you and I might pitch in for a motorcade. There's always that possibility. Mark, one other thing that came to light, though, if he can't talk to any potential witnesses, now just last night he had dinner, I believe, with this Walt Nauta, the so-called co-conspirator, his former body man who helped him move boxes around, or so the government has been telling us. But that's a wide network of people with whom he apparently cannot chat. Where did the judge draw the line on who's okay to talk to and who's not?
It's my understanding that list is still being generated, Neil, but imagine this. Imagine with these Trump rallies, what he is going to say. It's not like he doesn't have a platform to speak, so it's very likely he'll still talk about this case, but whether or not he's able to pick up the phone and call one of those specific aides, maybe a worker at Mar-a-Lago, that is yet to be seen. But in terms of exact names, we don't have that yet. Trump is still fundraising off of all of this. Right. He released a pretty bitter campaign ad where he was talking, Neil, about how he feels that his opponents are going to continue to attack him like this, and he was going to fight back. He called for all these people out here, in addition to the media, to show up to show their support today. The crowd has dwindled quite a bit from what we saw only a few hours ago, but there's also been security scares. There was a suspicious package earlier today. There were reports of a bomb threat, but again, there's no indication of anything serious here, but also a reminder of the heightened sense of security and the fears of political violence that continue not just today, but will likely continue throughout the rest of this campaign.
Got it. Mark Meredith, thank you. Great coverage, my friend, as always. Want to go to Jonathan Turley, the George Washington University law professor. And Jonathan, as we were discussing here, that's quite a caveat to put on the former president. I could almost see the Walt Nauta thing, don't talk to that guy, even though he had dinner with him last night. And here's the guy who's, I guess, specifically the co-conspirator in all of this, and moving and shuffling these boxes around. But then to extend that to a list to be determined, I guess, that could be a wide list of potential witnesses with whom the former president cannot speak. And then I wonder if he does, what are the implications?
Right. This is not a president who's known to stay within the lines that others draw for him. So it's going to be a challenge. The other thing that we're waiting to see is whether the court is going to feel compelled to impose any type of a gag order that's fairly standard in high-profile cases, in fact, many non-high-profile cases. But this is not your standard defendant. This case is already part of the presidential campaign. And I would be really quite leery if I was the judge in trying to limit Trump in being able to speak about this case. I mean, you're going to have to play this hand as you find it as the court. And this case is now part of a national debate. And to say that every other candidate can discuss the case but Trump would raise some pretty serious questions under the First Amendment. So that's something the court's going to have to grapple with, but it may not take long because they've said that the former president's on his way to a rally where he's going to speak publicly, presumably about this case.
You know, I didn't want to interrupt you, Jonathan, but apparently the motorcade has stopped outside a cafe, I believe Cafe Versailles. I don't know if that's a haunt or a favorite place of the former president, but what are you to make of that? Obviously, quite a crowd upon seeing that, but go ahead.
I've been to Cafe Versailles. The Versailles is a real landmark in Miami. Great food. It is a special place for Cuban Americans. And quite frankly, if he's stopping there on his way out, it's showing that he's still keeping his rational mind about him, because I don't think you should leave Miami without stopping for some takeout at that particular cafe.
We can see him now, Jonathan. We can see him now, and there are cameras in there. So let's, guys, if we can listen for any sound that might be coming from this Cafe Versailles. The former president stopped there moments after pleading not guilty. 37 counts against him on the improper handling of classified documents. I know there are camera crews inside there, guys. This is a famous Cuban bakery and I'll defer, obviously, to Jonathan on that. Can we listen for anything? Let's listen in.
Sorry, he had us held right there. We can't go behind the counter.
No, it said not behind the counter.
We might be able to get something. This is Donald Trump stopping at this Cafe Versailles in Miami, obviously well known in the Cuban community, well known to the Miami community. Jonathan Turley knew it quite well. Excuse my ignorance that I did not, but let's listen into this. This is a group of ministers that looks like competing religions here, or different denominations being represented here. They were helping the president a brief prayer to help get him through this. This is what we're told and being conveyed to me via email. The president in this Cafe Versailles, this was an unplanned stop, but apparently known by some that he would be coming by. Let's listen again.
Proceedings for Trump. Talia. Mr. President. Thanks very much. Talia, how are you, Mr. President? Come on out. Hi, Mr. President. Talia, come here.
How are you, my friend?
Are you okay?
I'm good. Are you okay? With you.
100% here. Where is he on? Are you ready? Are you ready? Food for everyone. Food for everyone. Thank you very much, darling. You take care of yourself. Where's Jorge?
Right here, sir.
Keep fighting, sir. All right, let's get a picture. Come on. This guy, great champ. Just don't fight him.
Going this way, sir. Justin? Going this way.
Pero tiene que salir de presidente otra vez. Tiene que salir otra vez. Look at the outside. Happy birthday to